Hi guys! Welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into the epic saga of the Middle Ages, from the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 to the rise of feudal kingdoms, Charlemagne's coronation, the Carolingian Renaissance, and the birth of medieval universities. We'll explore Viking raids, the Crusades, the investiture controversy, and the defining moments that shaped Europe's destiny. If you love history and crave fascinating tales, hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and let us know in the comments. Which medieval milestone surprised you the most? Let's embark on this medieval adventure. Now, imagine you're standing in the heart of the Eternal City. The marble columns of the Forum rising like silent sentinels against a pink dawn sky. The air is heavy with incense and the distant clang of armor. But something in the streets feels hollow, as if the lifeblood has drained from these ancient stones. You've heard rumors of unrest on the frontiers, barbarian warbands pressing the Rhine and Danube, generals selling offices to fill their coffers, and emperors vanishing in palace intrigue. Yet nothing prepares you for the day a humble soldier named Odoacer strides into the imperial palace and forces the young Romulus Augustulus to lay down his diadem. You watch as the boy emperor, barely a teenager, removes the purple robe that once signified Rome's unending power. In that gesture, you sense the end of an era that stretched back a millennium from the earliest republic to Augustus's golden age, from the conquests of Trajan to the faith of Constantine. You feel the weight of history shifting beneath your feet, the Western Empire's centuries-long struggle to maintain its borders, its economy sapped by endless civil war, its cities hollowed by plague and taxation. As you wander through the empty Senate chambers, you recall the lessons of your tutors, how Rome's greatness was built on law, roads, and legions. But now, the walls are crumbling, graffiti scrawled in Gothic runes telling of new masters to come. You trace your fingers along the carved reliefs depicting Jupiter's victory, and you wonder if the gods themselves have turned away. In the marketplaces, traders haggle over grain shipments that never arrive, and you glimpse the fear in mothers' eyes as they clutch sackcloth bags, praying to whoever will listen for just enough sustenance to survive. Beyond the city gates, you journey along the Antonine Wall toward Pannonia. There, veteran soldiers guard fortresses that have seen better days. Their discipline remains, but their banners bear more foreign symbols than Roman eagles. You pass by villages where the local chieftain offers allegiance to the highest bidder, and you realize loyalty has become as scarce as gold. The legions, once a symbol of order, now answer only to paymasters who care more for tax revenue than for Rome's enduring legacy. At dusk, you find yourself in Ravenna, where the imperial court has taken refuge, its halls cloistered behind high mosaicked walls. In the Great Basilica, you watch bishops debate doctrine, aware that spiritual authority is now filling the vacuum left by political collapse. Christianity, once persecuted, has become a unifying force even as secular power fractures. You ponder how faith can outlast armies, how prayers might weave a fragile thread of continuity through an age of upheaval. One morning, you rise before dawn to the clatter of hooves on cobblestones. A messenger arrives bearing Odoacer's decree. The Senate will be maintained, consuls appointed, and tribute sent to Constantinople, but no more Western emperor will sit upon Rome's throne. You feel a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief that the city will not be sacked in anger. Dread that its destiny now lies in the hands of a barbarian warrior. You realize the old world has passed into the realm of legend, replaced by a patchwork of kingdoms where the lines between conqueror and protector blur. As seasons turn, you travel south to Gaul, where a new king claims descent from Roman patricians, yet rules with sword and shield. In the fields, once plowed by legions, you see peasants bound to the soil by custom and coercion. Their plight seems distant from the imperial court, yet it springs from the same root as Rome's authority recedes. Local lords fill the void, forging a social order that will define medieval life. You stand beneath oaks where assemblies once debated laws, now overshadowed by fortified keeps that crown every hilltop. In the twilight of the empire, you're drawn back to the Forum one last time. The Temple of Saturn lies in ruin, its roof fallen in, statues broken. A group of children chase a goat past the rotting columns, their laughter echoing through empty arches. You pause by the Arch of Titus, once a monument to Roman triumphs over Judea, and you feel both sorrow and awe for an empire that stretched from the Scottish Isles to the sands of Syria, whose story now closes on this humble street. Yet even as you mourn the passing of Rome, you glimpse the seeds of what will follow the mingling of cultures, the forging of new identities, the birth of kingdoms that will claim Rome's legacy in name, if not in form. You sense that the Middle Ages, with its castles and cathedrals, its chivalry and crusades, owes its foundation to this moment when a soldier deposed an emperor and set in motion a future both darker and more wondrous than any in Roman annals. So you turn away from the empty Senate, your heart heavy, but your mind alight with questions. How will Europe reshape itself in the absence of imperial law? What role will the Church play in binding fractured lands to a common faith? Which kingdoms will rise from the ruins, and which will vanish into obscurity? As you walk down the Via Sacra toward sunset, gladiatorial statues silhouetted against blood-red skies, you realize that your journey through history has only just begun, and that the fall you've witnessed is but the first chapter of a new age waiting to be written. You barely have time to mourn Rome's passing before a low rumble reaches your ears, the ground-shaking cadence of countless hooves and wagon wheels rolling westward. Turning from the crumbling Forum, you ride for the open plains and find yourself swept into a human river that stretches from the icy Baltic to the sun-scorched Danube. You can't count the tribes or tongues you hear Alemanni traders arguing over yokes of oxen, Vandals singing funeral dirges for lost homelands, Suebi children chasing dogs beneath wagons piled with bronze cauldrons and goatskin tents. Everywhere. Smoke spirals up from campfires as elders red the sky for omens. What you are witnessing is not a simple march, but an exodus entire peoples abandoning forests, islands, and steppe in search of land where they can survive winters, escape rival warbands, or claim the riches whispered to lie inside Roman Gaul and Hispania. At the heart of this torrent rides a terror you first glimpse at dusk, horsemen with long braids, lamellar vests that glitter like beetle shells, and bows carved from bone and sinew. They move like a storm cloud, silent, swift, relentless. When their scouts circle your position, you understand why legions once feared the name Hun. Their leader, eyes narrowed against the setting sun, demands grain and guides. Refusal is met with arrows that hum past your cheek and bury themselves in oak trunks behind you. As night falls, you hear the stories how these riders thundered out of the Eurasian steppe, shattered the Allan confederations, and drove Gothic kingdoms like deer before wolves. You begin to see the chain reaction, how a single nomadic empire can uproot settled peoples, who in turn press against Rome's battered limes, desperate for refuge behind its walls. You follow one such displaced nation, the Visigoths, who gather at the Danube's edge, their wagons loaded with everything they own: family shrines, iron pots for brewing mead, battered shields emblazoned with sunbursts. You stand beside them as they plead with Roman commanders for safe passage across the river, promising service in exchange for land. The officials, more concerned with bribes than treaties, cram thousands into makeshift camps, selling rancid dog meat at extortionate prices. Hunger turns to mutiny. You watch whole cohorts of refugees seize Roman granaries. And by dawn, the Gothic leader Fritigern rallies his warriors under a red-painted banner. When the imperial army finally forms ranks on the plains of Adrianople, you feel the tremor of cavalry charges, see spears splinter against shields, and witness an Emperor Valens vanish amid the smoke of his burning encampment. The defeat sends a shudder through every frontier fort still loyal to Rome. For if one migrant army can destroy a legion, what might 10 accomplish? As seasons change, you trek north to the Rhine, where Roman patrols once marched in shining Lorica segmentata. Now you find frontier towns emptied of cohorts, their watchtowers held by Frankish foederati warriors, bound to the empire by oath, yet driven by ambitions of their own. You share stew beneath a leather awning with a Frankish chieftain whose wrist bears a ring gifted by a Roman general gold payment for guarding a stretch of border the empire can no longer defend. He tells you he serves Rome because it grants titles and silver. But in his eyes, you sense he serves himself first. That realization strikes you like cold rain loyalty. In this age of migrations, is a currency traded at the whim of opportunity. Further west, you join a ragged column of Vandals slogging through snow toward Gaul. Their seer speaks of fertile fields and temperate breezes beyond the Pyrenees, yet every mile bleeds warriors to disease and ambush. You witness their funeral rituals' torches reflected in ice-rimmed rivers, song echoing through groves where they bury clan talismans beneath stones. In moments of quiet, elders recount ancestral myths, how their god Woden favors wanderers who meet adversity with courage. You realize that each migrating tribe carries not just weapons and livestock, but entire cosmologies, ready to plant new seeds of culture wherever they settle. Rome, once a melting pot on its own terms, is now merely one crucible among many. One spring morning, on the banks of the Loire, you encounter a Roman villa repurposed as a Burgundian stronghold. Mosaics of Neptune now lie beneath straw, and marble columns support shields painted with runic knots. Inside, the local count negotiates marriage between his daughter and a Burgundian prince, forging alliances that rewrite maps faster than scribes can redraw them. You observe the ceremony Latin vows melded with Germanic oaths, a Christian priest blessing a bride whose dowry includes both vineyards and armored retainers. The scene crystallizes the New Order hybrid polities forged in the crucible of migration, blending Roman law, tribal custom, and ecclesiastical authority into something neither ancient nor fully medieval yet. Southward, in the Italian peninsula, you traverse roads cracked by frost and neglect. Villages here speak in whispers about Ostrogothic cavalry under Theodoric the Amal, who promises to restore Roman grandeur while honoring Gothic tradition. You eavesdrop on merchants debating whether to pay taxes to Ravenna's imperial bureaucrats or to Theodoric's emissaries, whichever coin buys the safest route for next month's caravan. Even the Pope walks a diplomatic tightrope, offering blessings to warriors who keep cities standing while preserving Roman liturgy. In the shuffle of scrolls and treaties, you sense how governance evolves. Power is no longer a straight line from emperor to province. It is a web of negotiated loyalties among migrating peoples, Roman remnants, and a church rising in influence. Yet migration is not only a clash of swords and decrees, it is also the silent spread of ideas, crafts, and diseases. You spend nights in smoky longhouses where blacksmiths from Thuringia trade, forging secrets with Roman fugitives, producing swords that weld step-style composite blades to classical hilts. You taste honeyed ale flavored with Mediterranean spices, and watch weavers blend Tyrian purple yarn with Nordic patterns. Plague rumors follow trade routes like shadows, and you learn to recognize the first cough that clears a crowded hall. Still, life persists in its stubborn resilience. Children chase each other through encampments. Scribes copy torn codices onto birch bark, and bards compose epics that merge Roman heroes with tribal legends. Aeneas walking side by side with Arminius beneath mythic starlight. On a wind-swept ridge overlooking the Rhone, you pause to consider the landscape below. What was once a patchwork of Roman provinces now resembles a mosaic of migrating nations. Visigothic Toulouse, Burgundian Lyon, Frankish settlements along the Somme. Each territory pulses with new rhythms, different languages, laws, and liturgies, yet the Roman roads linking them remain, scarred but unbroken. You realize that the highways of empire have become corridors of migration, channeling both chaos and creativity across a continent in flux. As twilight falls and campfires flicker to life along the riverbanks, you sense the scale of transformation. The old imperial identity has fractured, but from its shards people are forging fresh bonds, sometimes in blood, sometimes in faith, often in both. You think back to that moment when Romulus Augustulus set down his crown, and you understand now that his abdication was not merely an end, but a catalyst. The migrations you witness are not a footnote to Rome's fall. They are the tide that will carve new shorelines, shaping kingdoms that one day call themselves France, Spain, or Italy. And as you wrap a worn cloak around your shoulders against the night chill, you know your journey through this turbulent age has many miles yet, each step carrying you deeper into a world remade by movement. You wake to the smell of wet cedar and freshly turned earth. Dawn light pours through the gaps in a timber palisade that wasn't here only a season ago. Yesterday, this hilltop overlooked a patch of abandoned Roman farmland. Today, it crowns a newborn capital. You slip outside your tent and watch carpenters raise a wooden hall for Theuderic, son of Theodoric the Great, who now rules northern Italy from Verona. These Ostrogothic builders hammer Roman nails into Germanic beams, their voices mingling with the Latin orders of imperial surveyors measuring foundations. In one glance, you see two worlds splice together, the marble mile markers of an empire, the runic tattoos of warriors who never saw Rome at its zenith. Your journey south from the Rhine taught you how fast-moving tribes can become rooted peoples. It began when you crossed the snowmelt rivers of Gaul and arrived in a land the locals now call Burgundia. Along the Saône, you found a court held under a wine-stained canopy by King Gundobad, regal in a cloak sewn from silk smuggled out of the East. He offered judgment in both Latin and his own tongue, reciting laws that wove Roman contract clauses into ancient tribal customs. You listened as he granted vineyards to a Gallo-Roman widow. She would keep her land if she promised wine for the king's Easter feast. There, on damp spring soil, you understood that conquest was giving way to administration, and that legitimacy now grew from balancing swords with scrolls. From Burgundy, you rode like a shadow across the Pyrenees behind a caravan of Visigothic traders. They spoke of a new palace rising in Toulouse, its walls painted with biblical scenes rendered in a style half Mediterranean, half steppe. Inside, King Euric convened bishops and counts to compile a law code, the Breviary of Alaric, so his Roman subjects could resolve disputes without fearing Arian judges. You sat in the gallery while scribes dipped quills into cuttlefish ink, transcribing edicts that kept Latin terminology yet bent inheritance rules toward Gothic clan structure. When debate ended, the king walked the colonnade with a priest of Saint Saturninus. The two discussed grace and governance as though they were inseparable. In that moment, you realized that faith was becoming a bridge across ethnic frontiers. Even while doctrinal rifts, Arian versus Catholic, still crackled beneath the polished surface. Winter drove you to the Western Sea, where Atlantic spray froze onto your boots. There, in a rugged corner of Hispania, you found Suebi settlers transforming Roman Lugo into a capital they called Bracara. You spent stormy nights beside their hearths as storytellers praised Wotan, then crossed themselves at dawn mass syncretism unfolding in real time. Fields once left fallow under Roman tax burdens now sprouted rye, and the local bishop partnered with the king's mother to fund stone churches whose pillars cannibalized marble from a crumbling imperial bathhouse. When a plague hit the port, you watched Suebi warriors escort physicians trained in Alexandria, proving that Mediterranean scholarship still traveled the old road network, even if the empire that built it lay in shards. Spring carried you across the Strait of Gibraltar on a cork-patched Vandal ship painted cobalt blue. These seafarers, once vilified as pirates, now anchor an African realm stretching from Tangier to Carthage. As you disembark, jasmine fills the air and mosaics flash gold under desert sun. Master craftsmen Roman, Moorish, and Vandal alike restore cisterns and aqueducts to irrigate olive groves financing King Thrasymen's glittering court. You walk the renovated Forum, where Latin merchants haggle over pepper, while Arian priests preach against Nicene heresy in basilicas that once echoed with Catholic hymns. Even here, on the empire's grain basket shore. The pattern repeats. Conquerors adopt Roman tax ledgers, Roman harbor fees, Roman marble floors. Because stability grows, profits faster than raids ever did. Yet beneath every fusion, you sense tension. At Verona, a senator whispers that Theodoric's benevolence masks iron control. His Gothic bodyguards answer only to their warlord king. In Toledo, Hispanic nobles fear Frankish incursions and persuade young nobles to learn Gothic so they can spy on royal councils. Outside Carthage, Berber tribes raid caravans, testing a kingdom whose navy cannot patrol mountain passes. You ride through these fault lines, hearing rumors that no king, even one crowned in Roman basilica light, can bind so many tongues forever. Still, you marvel at their attempt. Where legions once stitched provinces together, now marriage alliances, written codes, and shared Christian festivals provide the seams. One afternoon in Ravenna, you witness a ceremony that encapsulates the era. Theodoric kneels before a mosaic of Emperor Justinian, renewing a treaty that recognizes him as Patricius rather than Augustus. By accepting a title carved from the old imperial lexicon, he legitimizes Gothic rule, yet dodges outright rebellion from Constantinople. You watch courtiers Romans in togas, Goths in bearskin cloaks applaud together, though each group harbors its own agenda. A choir sings the Gloria in Latin. Outside, children practice Gothic archery beside fragments of Trajan's column shipped north as war booty. In your notebook, inked with charcoal, you write a single line: everything old is rehoused rather than replaced. Travel takes you next to Lyon, where Burgundian smiths forge pattern-welded blades etched with Latin mottos. Their royal mint strikes solidi bearing both a cross and an animal-headed battle axe, icons of spiritual and martial power fused on one coin. You spend an evening with a Roman jurist hired to tutor the prince in rhetoric. He confides that the Burgundian court pays him double what the Praetorian prefect once did. The lesson is clear where talent flows. Civilization rebuilds. Across these landscapes, you keep encountering roads sometimes whole, sometimes choked with weeds. Each mile of stone reminds you that Rome's physical skeleton endures, channeling not just armies, but artisans, pilgrims, and plague. Even ruined milestones offer guidance to travelers who never knew the empire firsthand. In border marches north of the Alps, Frankish settlers quarry those stones to fortify wooden motte and bailey castles. Down in Lusitania, Visigothic engineers refurbish a Roman bridge so herds can cross the Tagus en route to new markets. You reflect on how infrastructure outlives ideology, inviting successors to lay claim simply by maintenance. As midsummer dawns over the plains of Aquitaine, you pause on a ridge to survey patchwork lights dotting the valley towns where Latin psalms and Germanic war chants mingle under shared festival bonfires. You realize the migrations that once thundered like an oncoming storm have slowed, condensed, and crystallized into polities intent on permanence. These kingdoms copy Roman codices, repurpose imperial villas, and adapt frontier garrisons into royal courts. They wage war, yes, but they also mint currency, sponsor monasteries, and send envoys to one another along routes still measured in Roman miles. Closing your eyes, you imagine a child born tonight in Burgundia. She will grow up speaking a rustic Latin spiced with Frankish loanwords, pledging faith to Christ yet invoking ancestral spirits when illness strikes. Her homeland will feel neither wholly Roman nor purely Germanic, but something uncharted, a cultural alloy forged in the furnace of collapse and migration. And you sense that this alloy will set the foundation for a Europe of castles, cathedrals, and competing crowns. As twilight fades, campfires sprout like constellations over every hill, signaling both the end of Rome's singular night and the dawn of many smaller suns. You pull your cloak tighter, ready to ride east at first light toward rumors of a Carolingian ancestor named Pippin who is whispering of destiny. But for now, you linger, certain that you have witnessed the hinge on which antiquity turns toward medieval dawn kingdoms risen from ruins, carrying shards of empire into their own distinct yet familiar worlds. You leave the Burgundian campfires before dawn, hooves muffled in the dew-soaked grass, following rumors of a rising power beyond the misty Ardennes. Each mile carries you deeper into the riverine heartland where the Meuse and the Somme braid through marsh and meadow. By the time you reach Tournai, the very air crackles with expectancy traders' gossip that a warlord named Clovis has strung rival chieftains' shields along the city wall. And priests whisper that the same sword which cleaves skulls may soon carve a path for a new faith. You have heard plenty of baptism stories in your travels, Visigothic kings dabbling in Arian rites, Suebi nobles hedging bets between Roman saints and forest sprites. But something about this Frank feels different. He is young, ruthless, and most important, newly married to a Burgundian princess called Clotilde, a woman who prays to the same god as Rome's bishops. You sense that whatever bargain she strikes with her husband will echo far beyond any marriage bed. When word arrives of the battle at Tolbiac, you ride hard across winter fields, frost biting your cheeks. On the snowy plain, you find Frankish warriors stripping Alemanni corpses of iron rings and wolfskin cloaks. The living recount the miracle how, in the thick of combat. Clovis raised his eyes to a gray sky and swore to the Christian God that if victory were granted, he would abandon the war deities of his fathers. The tide turned, the Alemanni king fell, the survivors bent their knees. You watch blood freeze on Clovis's mail while Bishop Remigius greets him at the field's edge, whispering that kings who wear the cross rule not by terror alone, but by divine sanction. In that murmured council, you glimpse a political calculus sharper than any blade conversion as a claim to Roman legitimacy, a spiritual patent of nobility recognized from Brittany to Constantinople. Months later, on Christmas Day, you crowd into the cathedral at Reims, pressed shoulder to shoulder with nobles and warriors. Torches sputter resinous smoke as Remigius pours oil and holy water over Clovis's brow. The congregation recites Latin responses phonetically. Their guttural accents scrape against the marble vaults. Yet the liturgy holds. You feel the room tilt an invisible pivot where tribal kingship fuses with Catholic orthodoxy. Outside, drums beat pagan rhythms, but inside, the organ's drone drowns them. When the newly christened king steps onto the porch, sunlight catches the droplets on his hair like molten gold. The crowd roars, and you realize you have witnessed the genesis of a kingdom that will one day call itself France. Faith spreads on the back of diplomacy as much as on the wings of angels. You accompany Clovis's envoys south to Aquitaine, where Visigothic lords clutch Arian creeds like shields against Frankish expansion. The envoys carry letters sealed with wax depicting a lily, already a hint of future fleur-de-lis iconography, and each missive extends peace in exchange for Catholic unity. Some counts accept, others balk. Yet city by city, cathedrals shift doctrine, and markets follow suit. You note how merchants prefer ports where everyone shares a creed that sanctifies oaths under one God rather than splintered trinities. Gold always finds the straightest path, and right now that path runs through Rome's ecclesiastical network. From Gaul, you venture east, tracking the missionary wave that follows conversion's political frontier. In the dense Thuringian forests, you meet a Saxon monk named Boniface, born Anglo-Saxon, but aflame with zeal to fell the pagan Donar oak. You watch him swing an axe into the tree's massive trunk, while local villagers wait for lightning that never comes. When the oak crashes, Boniface orders its wood transformed into beams for a chapel. Awe replaces fear. Within months, entire clans present infants for baptism. You see how spectacle, married to scripture, shapes memory more lastingly than any royal edict. The wooden chapel smells of sap and incense, a blend of forest and faith that lingers on your cloak long after you ride away. Northward, across the frothy channel, you walk the moors of Era, where Patrick, long dead, still haunts every stone well and ring fort. You sit in a smoky roundhouse as bards weave his tale a captive shepherd who returned as bishop, kindling monastic fires that leapfrog across fields like spring gorse. Irish abbots now illuminate calfskin pages with swirling knotwork, turning Latin psalms into jeweled labyrinths of ink and gold. You help grind pigments malachite, cinnabar, lapis lazuli, and grasp that the gospel's voyage is no one-way street. In these Western Isles, Christianity absorbs Celtic artistry and exports it back to the continent as a prestige brand of holiness. Years pass in a blur of saddle leather and candlelight. You copy letters in Lombard script at Monte Cassino, where Benedict drafts rules of communal prayer and labor, forging a template for monasteries that will seed literacy across Europe. You kneel beside nuns in Kent who chant verses composed by a cowherd named Cedmon, proving that scripture in the vernacular can bloom in any tongue. You cross the Alps to meet Columbanus, the wandering Irish abbot who scolds Burgundian kings for concubines and channels penance into politics. Everywhere you go, monasteries sprout like fortifications of the spirit, silent yet formidable, repositories of both prayer and grain, offering refuge to travelers and authority to restless lords seeking moral validation. But the road is not all hymns and halos. In Frisia, you dodge stones tossed by fishermen who fear that abandoning sea spirits will anger fickle tides. In Bavaria, you witness a duke threaten to burn a church unless saints' relics deliver victory over Avars within a fortnight. You attend councils where bishops debate filioque clauses with the fervor of generals planning sieges. Theology is politics by other means. You mark how each kingdom's alignment, Arian or Catholic, Roman or Celtic, dictates alliances as surely as shared rivers or mountain passes. Still, one pattern dominates the cross, increasingly crowns kingship, binding diverse realms to a moral order that stretches, however imperfectly, from Iberia's pilgrim roads to the marble courtyards of Constantinople. Late one autumn, you return to Paris, no longer a muddled Gallic oppidum, but a budding royal seat girded by stone ramparts. Inside the Basilica of Saint-Denis, you watch Clovis's grandsons lay ornate reliquaries before the altar, each casket studded with garnets pried from warrior belts. They pledge to defend the faith their grandfather embraced in a fox fur cloak beside a frozen river. You recall that day at Tolbiac and marvel at how swiftly belief has mapped itself onto banners, laws, and even coinage that now bears crosses instead of Saturn's profile. Priests bless markets, scribes date charters by feast days, and even law codes open with invocations to the Trinity. Christianity is no longer an adopted fashion. It is the water in which political life now swims. Yet under that veneer lies unease. The same church that crowns kings also reserves the right to judge them. When a Frankish prince marries two sisters to secure adjoining counties, bishops threaten excommunication and armies retreat without swords drawn. You observe that spiritual authority, once a tool of rulers, has begun setting rules of its own. It will not be the last time heavenly mandates bend earthly crowns. Standing on the Ile de la Cité at dusk, you watch candlelight glimmer across the Seine and feel the city's heartbeat sync with bells tolling vespers. You understand that Europe has entered a new cadence. The rumble of migrations has quieted into the resonant chant of monasteries, the clash of tribal gods replaced by the ringing of church bells. The transformation is neither uniform nor complete. Pagan pockets smolder in Baltic marshes, and Aryan courts linger in the shadow of Pyrenees peaks, but the trajectory is unmistakable. A shared faith, transmitted by sword, sermon, and song, now supplies a common grammar for law, art, and diplomacy. You pull your cloak tighter against the chill, listening as night choirs lift their voices into a sky where constellations carry both Roman and Christian names. Somewhere beyond the dark horizon, fields await plowshares forged from melted spearheads, and scholars hunch over manuscripts that will travel to distant libraries under torchlight. You sense that this fusion of altar and throne has set the stage for an era when popes will challenge emperors and monks will preserve empires of ink. Your journey will lead you next to the court of a warlord scholar who dreams of reviving Rome through learning, and as you mount your horse at dawn, you feel ready to witness how belief can kindle not only souls, but entire renaissances. You set out from Paris just as dawn spills amber across the Seine, eager to see how the kingdom that Clovis baptized is faring under his heirs. At first, the road south feels reassuringly Roman moss-cushioned milestones, arches patched with fresh mortar. But after a day's ride, you sense a subtle unraveling. Tax collectors argue over boundaries no surveyor has marked in a generation, and toll-keepers stamp lead seals bearing 4 different royal insignia, those of Childebert, Clodomir, Clothar, and Theuderic, because Clovis's empire has been carved like a roast into quarters for rival sons. You taste the confusion in every marketplace merchants demand payment in solides struck at Soissons, Paris, or Orléans, unsure which mint will still matter by midsummer. You arrive in Orléans during Lent and discover Queen Clotilde keeping vigil amid incense, pleading that her feuding grandsons honor their father's faith. Yet before the paschal candles burn low, armored couriers gallop in with news of fresh blood on the fields of Vouillé. You race to the Loire Valley and witness brothers clashing beneath identical banners, Frank against Frank, their battle cries invoking the same Christ who was meant to bind them. The carnage leaves orchards trampled, vineyards torched, and a generation of nobles lying beneath winter frost. You realize Christianity can christen swords as easily as souls, and that dynastic pride now eclipses the unifying zeal that once toppled pagan altars. Years roll by in a blur of accession feasts and funeral pyres. You follow the power needle as it swings between Austrasia in the east and Neustria in the west, each court bribing bishops and marshalling counts to outmaneuver the other. In Metz, you stand beside scribes copying the Lex Salica into newer, leaner volumes, stripping away Roman precedents that no longer serve warlord justice. By the time you reach Rouen, those same volumes are being amended yet again, this time flavored with local customs of the Seine Valley, proof that authority is dissolving into provincial autarky. The king's once fearsome stallion riders, with hair to their shoulders, have begun delegating everything to their majordomes. The mayors of the palace who sign edicts while monarchs hunt or drink themselves into legend. One summer, you find yourself at the royal villa of Chelles, where a monarch barely 18 reclines on a silver couch, letting courtiers braid his hair into the sacred Merovingi braid while the mayor, Vornachar, disperses wheat rations and hires new mercenaries. The courtiers call their sovereign a roi fainéant, a do-nothing king, though not to his face. You watch him stamp wax seals with a lion he no longer controls and feel the throne's weight shifting beneath him toward men who wield ledgers instead of scepters. In back corridors, monks whisper that the true crown now rides on the shoulders of Arnulf of Metz and Pippin of Landen household stewards, whose piety cloaks hard strategic sense. You scribble their names in your journal, suspecting posterity will remember them better than the languid boy in purple who technically rules. Still, decadence coexists with astonishing vitality. You cross the Vosges to Luxeuil Abbey, where Irish missionary Columbanus has forged a monastic powerhouse from timber and prayer. Scriptoria glow like hearths in the night, illuminating parchment where monks blend Celtic spirals with Roman half-uncials, inventing the letter forms that will someday punctuate English Bibles. Royal patronage fills the granaries they may be lax in governing, but Merovingians lavish gold on saints' relics to hedge their bets with heaven. You kneel during vigils that last until your knees burn, and you feel knowledge surge through those cloisters even as royal courts decay. Into this swirl strides Queen Brunhild of Austrasia, a Visigothic princess ruling as regent for grandsons too young to grip a sword. You shadow her procession across the Rhine, marveling as she rewrites charters, erects roads, and challenges bishops who dare cross her. But a mirror image rises in Neustria Queen Fredegund, sharp-tongued consort to Chilperic, rumored to keep a cabinet of poisons. You attend a council where the two queens' envoys trade accusations thick as midges, and you realize Europe is witnessing its first great cat-and-mouse power duel fought by minds rather than armies. In the public squares, minstrels sing of daggers slipped beneath bedclothes, of assassins hiding in baptismal fonts, stories that turn history into dark folklore while the grain harvest ripens with indifferent steadiness. Eventually, the feud scorches everything south of the Ardennes. You survey a battlefield near Étampes, where both factions leave banners sagging in crimson mud, and you hear peasants mutter that kings might wear halos in mosaics, but devils on campaign. When plague follows war, you escort barefoot clerics distributing relic fragments as medicine. Their hollow-eyed faith is the only currency some hamlets still trust. You sense how quickly a realm can ricochet from royal opulence to near-biblical desolation, and how thin the veneer of Christian order remains beneath apocalyptic fear. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, the pendulum stops favoring Merovingian hair. In Austrasia, a tall, taciturn mayor named Pippin of Herstal leads cavalry at Tertry, routing Neustria and seizing the royal treasury. You watch soldiers hail him not as king, but Duke and Prince of the Franks, a title that sidesteps dynastic law yet commands unquestioned loyalty. Coins still bear a Merovingian head, but the die engraver renders the profile smaller, the cross above it larger, as though foreshadowing who truly blesses power now. In villa after villa, bishops toast Pippin's health, abbots seek his patronage. Even distant Lombard envoys bring silk gifts to his camp rather than the royal palace. You taste the shifting wind and know a new dynasty germinates beneath the long-haired kings, like oak roots under brittle ivy. You ride with Pippin's envoys along the Meuse, delivering capitularies that reset tolls and standardize weights, reviving trade arteries clogged since Clovis's grandsons first quarreled. Where law once splintered into local dialects, a hinge toward uniform policy creaks open. Peasant levies still owe labor to their count, but now those counts answer to a mayor who demands census rolls and plow counts reminiscent of Roman magistrates. You sense a return to bureaucratic gravity, a tightening of loose seams sown in the migration age, as if Europe inhales before a long stride. One frosty morning at the fortress of Herstal, you meet a sturdy boy sparring with wooden poles the mayor's grandson, Charles. He swings with unpolished fury but astonishing stamina, and tutors joke that he carries a hammer in his blood. You note the spark in his eyes and wonder if his generation will finish the quiet revolution his grandfather began. When you depart, Charles runs beside your horse and asks if Rome truly had walls that could swallow 10 cathedrals. You tell him yes, and he nods as though measuring a feat to surpass. On your journey back toward Paris, you pause at a hill shrine where villagers light candles beneath a chipped statue of Christ and a weather-worn plaque of Wodan, hedging bets even in worship. Yet the candles outnumber the runes now, and the Latin prayers ring louder than the murmured charms. The Frankish world is slowly recalibrating away from blood-soaked succession feuds toward a hierarchic order where piety dovetails with effective administration, and where a mayor's lineage can overshadow a king's anointed scalp. You feel the continent tilting again less violently than during the migrations, less dazzlingly than on Clovis's baptism day, but just as decisively. Power is consolidating, roads are resurfacing, and monasteries are stockpiling both grain and Greek manuscripts, all under the watch of men who have learned to wield faith as deftly as a lance. As dusk settles over the wooded ridges of the Ardennes, you sense the Merovingian twilight stretching behind you like a purple bruise across centuries. Ahead, faint but growing, glimmers the dawn of a line that will claim not merely to rule the Franks, but to resurrect an empire of the West. You spur your horse toward that promise, prepared to witness how the hammer in Charles's fists might forge the next chapter of the medieval world. You remember that boy in Herstal, the one who swung wooden poles until his palms bled. Only now the poles are ash-handled axes, and the boy is Charles, broad-shouldered and battle-scarred. When his grandfather Pippin dies, rival mayors snatch at the Frankish purse, and Queen Plectrude locks Charles behind iron bars in Cologne. You slip coins to the jailer, watch chains fall, and follow him across moonlit courtyards to a waiting horse. Dawn finds you galloping through the Ardennes, spreading word that a warrior prince lives and calls the Austrasian nobles to arms. They gather in clearing and cloister alike black-cloaked bishops beside wolf-pelt warlords, pledging to stand behind the only leader bold enough to break the Merovingian spell. In the frost-glinting fields outside Amblève, he feigns retreat, then slams into pursuing troops so suddenly that helmets fly like startled ravens. By nightfall, the Neustrians scatter, and Charles's banner, the saltire hammer, flutters over wagons filled with royal tribute. Victory breeds more battles. Vincy, Soissons, the echoing heath of the Lippe, where Frisian longships burn under winter stars. You ride flank, feeling hoofbeats rattle your ribcage while Charles recalibrates warfare itself. He seizes church estates, not to desecrate them, but to fund a permanent corps of mailed horsemen. In return, he shields abbeys from brigands who once treated cloisters as granaries ripe for plunder. In council halls, he distributes charters that grant abbots new villages in exchange for prayers and grain taxes, effectively welding altar and saddle into a single engine of state. You watch blacksmiths test length stirrup straps, marveling at how a loop of iron lets a rider brace a lance with devastating force. The Frankish charge becomes thunder incarnate, and gossip claims even the Rhine shivers when Charles's hoofbeats roll over its frozen surface. Trouble soon arrives from the horizon's scorching edge. Muslim raiders push over the Pyrenees, sacking Bordeaux and Tours, their banners embroidered with Quranic verses that flicker in the torchlight like meteors. You skirt blazing farmsteads, smell scorched wine casks, and see refugees stumble north clutching icons and infants. Charles answers with an economy of motion, no grand speeches, only a flurry of riders summoned by horn blasts echoing through oak corridors. On a ridge near Poitiers, you crouch behind a thicket as crescent standards ripple opposite iron crosses. For 7 hours, shield lines grind together. Frankish infantry absorbs charge after charge, while cavalry hangs back like a cocked fist. At dusk, Charles unleashes that fist, and the roar, when armored riders crash into fatigued Andalusi ranks, sounds like a cathedral roof collapsing. In the silence afterward, you notice birdsong returning, timid yet insistent, and you understand the road to northern Christendom has just been barred shut by a man history will dub Martel, the Hammer. The victory does not lull him, it sharpens his appetite for reform. You accompany him east, where St. Boniface hacks down pagan oaks and nails gospel pages to fresh-cut stumps. Charles guards the mission with spear walls, then endows new bishoprics at Würzburg and Mainz, ensuring conversion sticks like mortar rather than mere whitewash. In icy Advent twilights, you help copy a letter for the Pope, describing these frontier churches as fortresses of the soul. Rome replies with pallia white woolen stoles and praise that smells faintly of opportunity. You glimpse how salvation doubles as soft power. Bishops sanctify Charles's rule, and Charles funds the parchment that spreads their creed. When the Hammer finally lays down his weapon in 741, you stand at his bier in Saint-Denis, inhaling beeswax and pine resin while choirs chant antiphons that bounce off tombs of long-haired kings now eclipsed. His sons Carloman and Pippin inherit authority split like a double-edged blade. Carloman, tormented by visions of angelic swords dripping blood, retreats to a Monte Cassino cell, leaving Pippin to test whether the man who holds the mace might also wear the crown. You escort emissaries across the Alps' narrow passes where snowmelt sings under ice to Pope Zachary's audience chamber. The question posed is deceptively simple: should the one who exercises power also possess the royal title? The Pope's answer glides back like a wax-sealed dagger: better to call king the man who actually governs. Thus, in the autumn of 751 at Soissons, you stand amid frankincense and applauding magnates as Bishop Boniface pours holy oil over Pippin's head. The last Merovingian, Childeric III, is tonsured and packed off to a monastery. His legendary hair falls to the floor like a severed covenant. The anointing fuses two legitimacies, military success and divine sanction, and seals a pact between Frankish throne and Roman altar that will echo for centuries. Papal envoys leave with wagon loads of grain and a promise that Frankish arms will defend the See of Peter against Lombard threats. You sense the geometry of Europe redrawn in real-time spiritual longitude intersecting political latitude, marking a new meridian labeled Carolingian. Riding back through misty beech forests, you notice monasteries bustling with scribes who tidy Latin grammar and standardize liturgical chant. Royal inspectors, missi dominici in embryo, tally harvests to ensure cavalry horses stay fed through winter. Peasants still bless fields in both Christ's name and clandestine nods to rain spirits. But the tilt toward ordered governance is undeniable. Villages damaged by Merovingian feuds now rebuild timber halls under edicts that stipulate bridge repairs and outlaw private vengeance. Along every Roman road resurfaced with crushed limestone, you feel the wheel of history gain traction. As you camp beside the Meuse one crisp night, flames reflecting off your ink-stained journal, you recall the boy who dreamed beside your saddle and marvel at the dynasty he now inaugurates. Somewhere beyond the dark tree line, his own son, a lanky youth named Charles, practices letters and sword drills, oblivious to the enormity of the future waiting in his shadow. You close your eyes to the lullaby of river water against stone, sensing that the hammer blow which broke old barriers has also forged a foundation sturdy enough to bear an empire. The first sparks of a renaissance flicker in the scriptoria, while papal letters glow like embers in royal archives. Tomorrow, you will ride east toward Aachen, drawn by whispers of a palace rising on marshland. But tonight, you breathe a world recalibrated one step closer to Rome reborn, yet tempered by the anointing oil that glistens still on a new king's brow. You first meet the grown Charles on a cold April dawn outside Pantheon, where mist hugs the marshes and the smell of new sawn oak hangs in the air. The lanky teenager you once watched practicing sword drills has thickened into a towering rider whose shadow seems to stretch the length of a tilled furlong. He greets you with the quick grin of a man who measures distance in days' marches, not courtly hours. His father Pippin has died, and the realm now split between Charles and his brother Carloman already feels too small for two lions. Carloman hovers in the southeast, brooding behind Lombard alliances. Charles, restless, studies maps by torchlight, the wax pooling into lakes around wooden markers that represent duchies begging to be disciplined. You sense ambition in every finger tap he lays on parchment, but also curiosity. What would a kingdom look like if borders bent to his will, the way stirrup-braced lances do under his charge? That winter, Carloman succumbs to fever, and the fractious Frankish magnates gather at Corbeny to decide whether to fracture the realm again or trust it whole to a single warlord. You stand inside the timber hall when the bishops raise their croziers and the nobles their drinking horns, pledging fealty to Charles alone. The oath rolls through the rafters like thunder: one king, one realm, one fate. Afterward, Charles invites you to ride with him east, where Saxon forests seethe with oath-breakers. "I will bring them the psalm or the sword," he mutters, fastening wolf-fanged clasps across his cloak. The First Saxon Campaign is a collision of world's smoky Frankish campfires flicker against moonlit groves where Irminsul, the sacred pillar, rises like a living spine of the earth. You watch Charles's warriors hack it down while monks chant the Te Deum, their voices trembling yet unwavering. When the pillar crashes and embers fly, you feel the forest itself exhale a sound between sorrow and surrender. Captives kneel for baptism in river water that runs red with iron-rich soil. Some accept the rite with blank eyes, others with thin disguises of compliance. You sense this war will not be settled in a single season. But Charles is already pivoting south. Pope Adrian begs relief from King Desiderius of the Lombards, whose brazen horsemen press on Rome's flaking walls. The Frankish host snakes through alpine passes still crusted with late snow, hooves sparking on granite where Hannibal once led elephants. At the gates of Pavia, you perch on a siege tower beside engineers fitting Greek fire nozzles recycled from Byzantine manuals. Inside the city, Desiderius starves beneath frescoes peeling like dead bark. When the walls finally groan open, Charles does not raise the capital. Instead, he strides straight to the cathedral, places a gold crown on his own head, and accepts Lombard nobles as vassals in exchange for their estates. You realize the hammer's son wields hammer and quill in equal measure conquest, then paperwork, then prayer. Victories stack like paving stones, the submission of Bavaria after the rousing speech on the banks of the Lech, the thrust beyond the Pyrenees to carve the Spanish March as a buffer against Cordoba's emir, the relentless Saxon spirals, where rebellions flare and die beneath waves of construction fortresses, bishoprics, royal mints. You ride at his side across landscapes repeatedly branded by his itinerant court. In each newly subdued valley, the pattern repeats: a wooden palace rises. A Mrs. Dominicus arrives with parchment charters, and cloister bells mark time until the land itself begins to hum in the Frankish key. Between campaigns, Charles summers at Aachen, a hunting lodge turned nerve center, its hot springs perfuming the air with mineral warmth. You watch masons unload porphyry columns ferried from Ravenate ruins. They will flank a chapel whose octagonal dome Charles sketches himself on wax tablets. Scholars cluster around him beneath canvas awnings. Anglo-Saxon Alcuin reciting Virgil, Lombard Paulus Diaconus compiling history, Visigoth, Theodulf debating Greek metrics. The king corrects copyists' spelling between mouthfuls of roast boar, insisting that every scribe adopt a clear Caroline hand, so God's word cannot be blurred by sloppy quills. You realize he is trying to tame not only frontiers, but also thought, bringing grammar, timekeeping, and liturgy to heal under one disciplined rhythm. Yet the empire's edges bleed. Saxon warlord Widukind slips from baptismal promises, torching churches in midnight raids. In the far northeast, Ivar Kuggans test Bavarian bulwarks. You gallop with field counts who recite capitularies clause by clause, even as they ride proof that Charles's law travels as swiftly as his lances. In Saxony, after the bloody trees of Verdun witness a mass execution that sears your dreams, the king orders 3 new monasteries founded on that very soil, as though to cauterize violence with psalmody. You help unload limestone blocks while monks chant for mercy over ground still warm from battle. Faint though it is, the chant takes root. Over years, you watch Saxon children recite Latin creeds their grandfathers cursed. As decades pass, Charles's beard silvers, yet his stride through palace corridors remains unhurried, deliberate. He eats sparingly, reads between military briefings, and insists his daughters learn both scripture and statecraft, though he keeps them from political marriages so no foreign prince can claim Frankish blood by wedding band. In long winter evenings, he summons you to the library alcove, quizzing you on the latest Spanish glossaries or on whether Irish computists have refined the Easter tables. Sometimes, when the candles gutter low. He rubs his eyes and confesses that empire building is a war against entropy. Roads crumble, counts grow lazy, dialects splinter, and only constant vigilance holds the mosaic together. One Christmas Eve, you accompany him through torch-lit cloisters toward midnight mass. Snowflakes whirl like sparks. The whole palace smells of resin and freshly planed cedar. Without warning, he stops beneath an archway, places a calloused hand on your shoulder, and asks whether you believe a single ruler can truly knit Christendom into one fabric. You search for an answer and find only a question of your own: can any mortal loom be wide enough? He smiles, half weary, half resolved. Tomorrow, he says, we ride for Rome. You ride out at dawn, hooves crunching over frost-tipped heather. Ahead lies an audience with Pope Leo. Rumors of rebellion inside the Eternal City. Whispers that the Roman imperial title has grown lonely since Ravenna's exarchs dwindled to parchment ghosts. Charles's war banners, once raw wool, now embroidered with lilies and crosses, snap like prophecy in the wind. Behind you, the Frankish realm stretches from the Atlantic surf to the Carpathian foothills, from the Frisian dunes to the Lombard plains, a continent-sized bellows inhaling faith and exhaling ordinance. As the Alps rear up again, old acquaintances now you reflect on the journey that began with a pale boy swinging wooden poles. You have watched him hammer borders, kindle schools, baptize nations, and summon architects to cage light beneath domes of marble and gold. Yet as you guide your horse into the first switchback, you sense the trail's steepest ascent still lies ahead. Whatever awaits in Rome laurel circlet, iron crown, or something wholly unforeseen will decide whether his life's forge yields a temporary blaze or a fire bright enough to brand the centuries. You tighten your cloak, feel snow sting your cheeks, and follow the king onward, ready to witness history strike its next thunderous blow. You crest the final ridge at dawn, and Rome unfurls beneath you, the Tiber flashing like a bronze serpent, and the 7 hills pricked with watchfires that gutter in the winter wind. You can almost taste antiquity in the air. Crushed laurel, marble dust, candle smoke, yet the city feels restless, its basilicas flanked by half-collapsed temples and its alleys patrolled by Frankish guards in iron helms. Pope Leo has taken refuge behind the Lateran's frescoed walls after a street mob tried to gouge out his eyes. And every banner you pass bears either the crossed keys of Peter or the gold lilies of the Franks. When you dismount inside the Leonine Palace, the king greets you in a hall hung with faded tapestries looted from Lombard coffers. His voice low, measured, unwavering. Tomorrow is Christmas, and heaven itself seems poised to decide who will guard Christendom's battered heart. Nightfall drags a cold rain across the Forum, and you walk its broken flagstones while monks chant litanies that echo between cracked columns. Fires flicker in braziers set beside the Arch of Titus, curling steam from the cloaks of pilgrims who have marched here on bloody feet to beg indulgence. They speak of miracles and omens, how a star hung motionless above St. Peter's dome 3 nights ago, how a blind mason claimed he heard angel wings rustling in the nave. You suspect rumor works harder than any envoy to prepare the city for what dawn may bring. But you also sense an undercurrent of fear. Romans remember emperors. The very stones carry the weight of empire like dormant thunder. And no one, not even the Pope, knows what will happen if that thunder rumbles again. At Matins, bells shiver through the mist, and torches light the path up the Vatican Hill. You walk beside the king under a canopy of purple dyed so deep it looks like midnight trapped in cloth. His shoulders are broad beneath a wool mantle lined in lynx fur, and yet he carries himself as if the garment weighs nothing. Inside the basilica, candlesticks as tall as soldiers cast molten halos across a crowd of bishops, envoys, and Roman nobles pressed together in uneasy truce. Incense churns the air until the nave seems swaddled in cloud. Somewhere above, mosaicked saints stare down with solemn gold eyes as the procession begins. Pope Leo in snow-white vestments, the choir intoning Gloria in excelsis, Frankish paladins thumping spear butts on marble to mark each measured step. Mass unfolds in the cool hush of early morning, words of the gospel sliding over the congregation like water over stone. You kneel beside the royal dais, close enough to feel the faint tremor in the king's breathing as the Pope ascends the altar's final step. The liturgy reaches its climax, and Leo turns, holding aloft a circlet wrought from ancient Roman gold, said to have been melted down from captured Visigoth coins. In that instant, candles flare, trumpets blare, and the pontiff lowers the crown onto Charles's bowed head. Carolus Augustus, Emperor of the Romans, he proclaims, voice ringing clear as a bell in frost. You watch the king's shoulders straighten, as if the weight of a millennium settles into its rightful place. An electric hush ripples through the basilica before erupting into a roar. Bishops shouting Te Deum, Frankish knights banging shields, Roman citizens crying out that the empire lives again. For a heartbeat, you feel the centuries fold Caesar's laurel, Constantine's diadem, Justinian's purple, all converging on this moment when a Frankish warlord becomes heir to an idea older than any kingdom still breathing. Yet you also catch the flicker of calculation behind Leo's serene gaze. By crowning a protector, he has tethered papal fate to Frankish steel, asserting that no emperor may rule without the Church's blessing. You understand that the ceremony is both sacrament and statecraft, heaven's imprimatur, stamped onto earthly power with wax that can still melt if the alliance falters. The days that follow are a blur of decrees and diplomatic feasts. You copy charters in a side chamber while Latin and Frankish scribes hammer out new titles, patrician offices rebranded. Byzantine claims politely shelved, Rome's senatorial relics repurposed as ceremonial posts to soothe civic pride. The king receives envoys from Venice, Benevento, even distant Asturias, each prostrating themselves before the new Augustus. Yet he spends as much time with scholars as with courtiers, debating Augustine's City of God or quizzing Alcuin on Greek declensions. At night, he dictates capitularies that will ripple across the empire, mandates for rebuilding aqueducts, orders to standardize coinage, instructions that every parish school teach boys to read the Psalms. You realize that for him, the crown is less a jewel than a lever, something to pry up an entire civilization. When the Frankish host finally departs Rome in early spring, the road north is lined with pilgrims cheering themselves hoarse. But you notice their eyes linger not on the imperial standard, but on the golden orb gripped in the king's hand. The world made small, held in a single palm. Crossing the Alps again, you feel the weight of new responsibility settle over his retinue. Counts ride with backs straighter. Abbots polish sermons about obeying imperial law. And even hardened captains hush stable boys who speak lightly of campaign loot. There is fresh gravity in the title Caesar. You stop at monasteries where scribes already illuminate scenes of the coronation. Tiny panes of azure and crimson, hammered gold leaf halos, Latin captions in the spare, elegant strokes Charles had commanded. The story is spreading faster than any army. Saxony, however, has not read the script. Widukind's final rebellion flares like a dying torch along the Elbe, and the emperor galvanizes fresh levies with chilling efficiency. One edict offers amnesty for rebels who submit. Another threatens exile or death to any who defile churches. You ride into forest clearings where wood smoke mingles with hymn smoke monks singing vespers beside half-finished blockhouses. Over the next months, the fires of revolt gutter out, replaced by the steady glow of frontier bishoprics. You sense that the imperial title does not temper Charles' iron. It sheathes it in law, making each campaign feel less like conquest and more like the tightening of a vast mechanism. Summer finds you back in Aachen, where the half-finished chapel now soars in octagonal splendor, porphyry columns catching noonlight like embers. The emperor installs a marble throne salvaged from a Roman palace, its worn armrests polished by hands long turned to dust. From this seat he receives envoys from Baghdad, their saddlebags lined with silks and astrolabes. He trades them Frisian's wool cloaks and promises safe passage for scholars who can decipher Greek medicine. At night, he paces beneath the gallery's lamplit arches, tracing constellations outlined in mosaic tiles, pondering how far the empire's mantle can stretch without tearing. You walk beside him, listening as he dreams aloud a standardized script for every court, a calendar that aligns saints' days with sowing seasons, a network of learning that binds monks in Ireland to judges in Bavaria. In his mind, politics and pedagogy are threads of the same tapestry. Yet horizons darken as autumn approaches. News arrives that Byzantine Empress Irene, ruling alone after blinding her son, may view the new Western emperor as a pretender. Some advisors urge preemptive war, others suggest marriage to unite the thrones. Charles weighs each counsel while flipping a coin between scarred fingers, its stamped cross gleaming in candlelight. You sense that the crown has made diplomacy as lethal as any battlefield, and every decision now resonates from Brittany's wave-lashed cliffs to Baghdad's jasmine-scented courts. One frost-sharp dawn, you stand beside the imperial reflecting pool, steam curling from its surface like ghostly banners. The emperor gazes at his own mirrored image, the warrior, the lawgiver, the Roman Augustus, and turns to you with a half-smile, equal parts triumph and burden. Empire, he says, is a forge without rest. The metal cools the moment the hammer pauses. You recall the boy of Herstal and the hammer of Poitiers, and realize the arc of his life has formed a blade now poised to test the centuries. As cathedral bells toll prime, you feel history tighten around you like the cinch of a war saddle, and you mount up once more, ready to ride the perimeter of a realm that has just reclaimed an ancient, perilous name. You ride north from Rome, behind the newly crowned emperor, frost still clinging to the mane of his destrier, and watch the imperial standard ripple against a sky the color of hammered tin. Coronation has shifted something elemental in the man, the urgency in his gait, the frequency with which he summons scribes, the way his gaze flicks from ruined milestones to abbey towers as though measuring the distance between past grandeur and future promise. By the time the Alps narrow into the rolling pasture of Alemannia, he has turned the march itself into a mobile council. At each night encampment, he spreads vellum across a camp table, drafts capitularies by torchlight, then has you carry the wet ink copies to bishops and counts, still wiping travel dust from their boots. The message is simple. Relentless and empire reborn must first relearn how to read. When the column reaches Aachen, the half-finished palace complex resembles a beehive breathing steam into late winter air. Builders shout in Frankish and Lombard, fit porphyry columns into sockets carved from Swabian granite, and plain cedar planks whose scent competes with the sulfur tang of the hot springs. Instead of disbanding his army, the emperor billets veterans alongside masons and painters. The clink of hammer on chisel becomes the day's reveille. Psalmody, its vespers. You are assigned quarters beside the Aula Regia, close enough to feel dawn vibrate through scaffolding. Each morning, a bell summons not knights, but schoolboys, the princes, the pages, the sons of loyal counts into a vaulted hall where Anglo-Saxon Alcuin of York unwraps parchment scrolls like lengths of spun gold. Sit straight, tongues ready. Alcuin tells them, and soon 40 voices chant the Latin alphabet in a cadence as martial as any drill. You join the back row, cramped on a bench still sticky with resin, and copy Gloria Patri in the new hand the master insists upon clear. Spacious, every letter standing upright like a legionary in parade armor. It feels strange at first, no tangled Merovingian squiggles, no cramped half-uncials, but your wrist soon discovers a steady rhythm, and you realize clarity is its own kind of authority. Alcuin calls the script minuscule, a little way to write big thoughts, and he dreams aloud of the day every parish priest from Brittany to Bavaria can read a gospel without stumbling over abbreviations. Word of this school of Pallas spreads faster than the Rhine in springtime flood. Delegations of abbots arrive clutching sheaves of cracked codices, Virgil devoured by mice, Augustine blurred by candle soot, scraps of Isidore's Etymologiae rescued from a saddlebag that survived Saxon arrows. The emperor orders them copied, corrected, and bound in fresh oak boards, each volume stamped with an imperial monogram that looks suspiciously like a hammer disguised as a Christogram. You spend long nights in the scriptorium, where Northumbrian monks grind lapis lazuli into ultramarine dust, while Visigoth illuminators lay gold leaf so thin it trembles when you exhale. Candles gutter. But the work continues. To pause would be to let memory leak into darkness again. Outside, a different renaissance takes shape. Court architects adapt Roman octagons into a chapel whose dome catches the afternoon sun like a celestial shield. Lombard metalworkers cast bronze doors engraved with vines that coil into Greek letters. Frankish glassmakers set milky panes that diffuse the light into a perpetual dawn. The emperor walks the nave with hands clasped behind his back, reciting passages of Boethius he memorized as a boy. Testing the acoustics, he wants every syllable, sacred or secular, to carry another reminder that knowledge itself has become a fortress worth garrisoning. You accompany imperial missi on inspection tours that crisscross the realm like shuttle threads. One week you stand in the echoing baths of Trier, while scholars debate whether Galen's humors can explain a cow plague ravaging the Moselle Valley. The next you are ferrying wooden tablets to Fulda, where Abbess Leoba supervises a school for girls who learn psalmody by day and herbal medicine by moonlight. Everywhere you travel, you witness the same pattern: a church restored, a school founded, a set of tablets etched with Latin verbs left in the hands of children whose parents still mutter oaths to forest spirits. The conversion of the mind trails just behind the conversion of the soul, but it marches nonetheless. Not everyone greets this flood of ink with open arms. In Saxony, elders grumble that parchment is soft as lamb's belly, unworthy of binding a warrior's oath. In Lombard cities, clerics steeped in ornate cursive sniff at the emperor's austere minuscule as rustic affectation. Even some Frankish nobles fret that teaching peasants to read will dilute the mystery of authority. The emperor answers with councils at Frankfurt, at Aachen, at Tours where he listens, nods, then issues decrees that mix compromise with iron. Yes, local saints may keep their feast days. No, sermon Latin will not be simplified into the vernacular. Yet. But schools must be attached to every cathedral, and monastic libraries must catalog holdings or forfeit royal protection. The law speaks softly, backed by legions in reserve. One autumn, scholars from Toledo arrive bearing Arabic treatises on algebra and the astrolabe, gifts from a caliphate that recognizes intellect as neutral ground even when swords clash at border marches. The emperor invites them to a colloquy in the palace bathhouse, steam curling around diagrams of star cycles chalked onto marble. You stand in the vapor, translating as best you can, and watch frankincense mingle with cedar and debate. By the time the session ends, Frankish metalworkers are sketching improved quadrant designs, and court poets are experimenting with syllabic meters borrowed from Andalusi verse. Renaissance, you realize, is cross-pollination disguised as conquest. At year's end, a convoy departs for Rome carrying a codex so lavish it takes 4 men to lift. Inside lies a corrected Vulgate, margins illuminated with vines that sprout evangelist symbols and imperial emblems intertwined. You ride escort through sleet that turns roads to gray sludge, aware that within those pages the empire's signature is more indelible than wax or steel. When Pope Leo receives the gift beneath torch-lit colonnades, you glimpse tears in his eyes. He knows the text is both tribute and gentle reminder. Spiritual authority bound in covers branded with the emperor's seal. Back in Aachen, winter cloaks the palace in silence, broken only by the scratch of quills and the distant clang of blacksmiths forging book clasps. The emperor gathers his children around a low brazier, quizzing them on psalm translations, then challenging his eldest daughter to solve a riddle about the 4 rivers of paradise. You watch her answer without hesitation, Latin flowing crisp as spring water, and you sense a generational hinge these heirs will inherit not just kingdoms, but a circuitry of ideas strong enough to outlast shifting borders. One night, as snowflakes swirl past the rose window lattice, the emperor confides that empire is more than mailed horsemen. It is memory disciplined into form. Roads crumble, libraries can be rebuilt. But lose the habit of clear thought, and you forfeit resurrection. He holds a wax tablet inscribed with neat, minuscule his own hand, and asks whether you think future ages will judge the script elegant. You tell him elegance is less than clarity, and clarity he has achieved. He grins, places the tablet on the brazier, and watches the wax soften, but not melt. "Let storms come," he says. "We have copied the light onto pages. Even ashes cannot erase that while breath endures." You step outside into starlit cold, the chapel dome gleaming behind you like a frozen sun. Across the empire, thousands of candles flicker in cloisters, each one a fragile filament in a vast, newly woven net of learning. Standing beneath the constellations, you realize the revival you've witnessed is not a footnote to the emperor's conquests. It is the quiet engine that will drive them into legend. The hammer-forged order, but ink-steady, disciplined. Small will keep it alive long after helmets rust and banners rot. And so you pull your cloak tighter, ready to ride again at dawn. bearing letters whose words might outlast stone. You're still cataloging the last of the new palace library when a hush falls over Aachen. The emperor's heart has stopped. In the candlelit basilica, you kneel beside his marble throne, tracing the runic-thin minuscule that records his triumphs, and you realize you've watched ink outlive the hand that guided it. The bells toll a peal that rattles the scaffolding and stirs half-frozen swans on the palace ponds. Masons drop chisels. Schoolboys freeze mid-recitation. Across the empire, riders will carry wax-sealed tablets announcing the same blunt fact: the hammer's son, the Roman Augustus, is gone. Grief lasts a heartbeat. Uncertainty rushes in behind it. Louis the Emperor's surviving son steps into the throne room wearing a monk's plain wool habit under ceremonial crimson. He requests that the choir chant Miserere instead of a triumphal hymn, and that his father be entombed seated, as though presiding forever over the house of memory he built. You watch Louis's fingers linger on the marble armrests, a silent pledge to preserve, not merely inherit. Yet you sense tremors beneath that vow: 3 grown sons, each restless, aristocrats whose loyalty hinged more on the dead man's charisma than on institutional habit, and frontiers that know exactly when a falcon slips its jesses. Louis announces a program of penance. He purges the palace of entertainers, orders court ladies home, and invites ascetic advisors to prune excess from Carolingian etiquette. He even asks scholars to proofread his father's legislation for spiritual inconsistencies. At first, you admire the discipline, but soon you notice the courtyard emptying of grizzled captains who preferred the old balance of sword and scroll. In Saxony, once subdued villages mutter that the new emperor governs with sermons rather than war bands. On the Atlantic coast, longships ride autumn swells like bronze-crested sharks, testing river mouths that now lack the iron presence that once deterred them. Louis tries to preempt conflict by dividing the empire into sub-realms regna for each of his sons: Lothair, Louis the German, and Pippin of Aquitaine. Charters are drafted in graceful minuscule, sealed with imperial purple. You ride with messengers delivering the documents, and everywhere find abbots praising the plan's fairness. Yet nobles in each region read the parchment like wolves eyeing a divided carcass, gauging how far they can gnaw before the center bites back. The young princes accept their inheritances with smiles, but you catch the tension behind their eyes. Parchment boundaries feel temporary when your brother's border is just a day's gallop away. The first rupture comes when baby Charles, born late to Louis and his second wife, Judith, needs land of his own. At the imperial diet in Worms, you listen as courtiers invoke Solomon. But the brothers hear only subtraction. Their promised realms shrink to feed an infant's future. In taverns, minstrels parody scripture, and on the 8th day, God created the divider and called him emperor. Revolt crackles like dry straw. Lothair claims senior imperial rights and conspires with disaffected magnates. Louis the German rallies East Frankish counts, while Pippin drums up Aquitanian horsemen who still sing the old war songs about Rowan's horn. Civil war bursts open like a thunderhead. You stand at the Battle of Fontenoy, waist deep in trampled rye, while cousins hack cousins under banners that once shared the same lilies and crosses. The air carries a metallic smell, part blood, part shattered mail links. Clerics wander the field offering absolution in exchange for a whispered creed. Some soldiers die mid-paternoster. When dusk finally lowers its visor, you count thousands of bodies, each a parchment page torn from the library of the living. Charlemagne's dream of a single Christian commonwealth lies in tatters, soaked through with kin-shed guilt. After Fontenoy, Even the weather seems split. Storms pound Burgundy, while drought browns Saxon fields. Famine dogs refugee columns, and plague rides the trade roads. Viking raiders push up the Seine to sack Paris itself, pilfering relics painstakingly recopied during the Renaissance. You help load illuminated codices onto donkey carts bound for the fortified abbey of St. Gall, praying that the bright inks will survive salt air and torch smoke. The monks mutter that scribal work feels futile when the Northmen melt roof lead into arrows. Yet they keep copying. Habit endures where armies fail. Exhausted by war, the brothers meet on an island in the Saône, its willows drooping like wary counselors. You watch barges drift idle, while emissaries haggle terms, parchment unrolling across oaken tables slick with morning mist. 3 weeks later, in 843, the Treaty of Verdun is signed. You hold one of the duplicate copies as wax seals cool. The empire subdivided into 3 longitudinal blocks: West Francia to Charles the Bald, East Francia to Louis the German, and a long middle strip, Lotharingia, stretching from North Sea marshes to Italian olive groves for Lothair, who retains the imperial title but little uncontested authority. The document's Latin is flawless, every clause balanced, every boundary rationalized along rivers and bishoprics. Yet the ink feels brittle. You sense history muttering that lines drawn by quill rarely survive the first hard rain. Riding west with Charles's entourage, you witness the immediate scramble. Counts repledge fealty no longer to the empire, but to whichever prince's tax collectors arrive first. Market scales are recalibrated to new coinage, and minters recast the imperial monogram into regional variants, a lily here, a cross pate there. Alcuin's standardized scripts fragment into dialectical spellings. In clerical margins, you see scribes experimenting with Romance vernacular. The earliest hints of French and Provençal pushing through Latin soil like spring weed. The cultural web, woven in Aachen, begins to fray. Yet in its unraveling, you glimpse new colors, localized saints' lives, epic poems celebrating regional heroes, legal commentaries that blend Roman law with Frankish custom. Back in Aachen, you walk the palace courtyard now echoing with emptiness. The octagonal chapel still sings when choirs rehearse, but half the workshops lie silent, their artisans lured to new courts vying for prestige. You find comfort in the scriptorium even as political unity crumbles. Monks press on, dispatching corrected Bibles to every subdivision. Knowledge, they insist, transcends border posts. You believe them until a letter returns from Lotharingia complaining the Illuminations present Charles's genealogy too prominently. Even parchment has become partisan. Yet not all is decay. In East Francia, Louis the German sponsors missionary drives into Slavic territories, translating hymns into Old High German. In Aquitaine, troubadours turn local dialect into art, their cansos weaving theology with courtly desire. And under Charles the Bald, Parisian scholars refine Carolingian minuscule into an even sharper instrument proto-Gothic hands that will one day frame Dante and Chaucer. You realize the Renaissance you witnessed has not died. It has seeded itself into multiple soils, each sprouting according to climate, threat, and ambition. As you cross the Meuse on a fog-shrouded morning, parchment packets strapped behind your saddle, you look back at the empire's broken silhouette and feel a bittersweet awe. The hammer forged unity, the quill disseminated wisdom, and human frailty fractured both. Yet inside every new principality stands a school reciting Latin vowels, a court debating whether scripture sanctions the ruler's latest decree, a bell tower whose bronze echoes the rhythm first set in Aachen's workshops. The idea of a shared Christendom has survived the surgical cut of Verdun, not a seamless body now, but a constellation, each star linked by the invisible lines of liturgy, language, and law. You spur your horse toward the setting sun, bearing a copy of the treaty annotated with the Emperor's seals, your own notes crowded in the margins. The road ahead leads through counties that will one day call themselves France, Germany, and Italy. But for now, share a past carved from the same once mighty trunk. You feel wind tugs at your cloak, as though urging you on. History isn't waiting. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Viking prows knife upriver, Magyar scouts probe Carpathian passes, and scholars in distant Baghdad plot celestial spheres with Greek texts copied in a Frankish court. The world is widening even as borders harden. And you scribe, courier, witness ride into that widening dusk, determined to keep copying the light before night fully falls. You ride west into a twilight thick with wood smoke and rumor, following the Seine until its gray ribbon splits around the Ile de la Cité. Paris still smells of wet stone and fish gut markets, yet the wharves pulse with new tension sentries pace the quays, and shipwrights hammer iron studs into scaffolded hulls that bristle like hedgehogs. One Burgess tells you flatly that steel spikes on a river barge are cheaper than ransoming monks. Another spits into the tide, muttering that even iron will not stop a dragon-prowed longboat once it has the wind. You help stack barrels of pitch behind a half-finished palisade and feel the timber tremble under your palms. The city has weathered Merovingian squabbles and Carolingian partitions, but everyone here senses that the next test does not speak Latin or any dialect the schools teach. Just before dawn, horn blasts ripple across the water like a flock of startled cranes. Orange flecks stud the horizon, then sharpen into twin rows of shields painted with wolves, ravens, and serpentine knots. The Vikings beach their ships on beds of crushed ice, axes flashing in torchlight. You glimpse a rune-carved figurehead snarling at the cathedral's weather vane as if daring the cross itself. Men pour from the hulls, chainmail rustling like wind in barley, and the air fills with that high, keening war song the monks at Saint-Denis once dreamed about in night terrors. You haul buckets of sand up the ramparts while militia archers notch arrows scraped from every chicken yard in the Ile-de-France. The first volley hisses skyward. The second returns, ringed in fire. Somewhere behind you, church bells stumble into an off-key clamor. In panic, they strike none of the canonical hours, yet everyone recognizes the alarm just the same. The day collapses into a blur of smoke and splintered shields. At dusk, you kneel beside barrels of rainwater, tinged pink with blood. And for a moment, you think you hear Boniface's old psalm chanted over the river's roar. But it is merely a fisherman pleading for his burned nets. By miracle, or perhaps by the stubborn masonry of the ancient Roman walls the city holds. Still, the Vikings do not depart empty-handed. They drag wine casks, chalice silver, and 2 trembling abbots back to their ships, demanding ransom in polished French far too elegant for pirates. As the longboats fade into the gloaming, you realize these raiders have learned that loot is lighter than conquest. They will return, again and again, until every town on this river either fortifies like a fist or bargains like a market stall. The Seine assault proves to be only the first iron nail in a sprawling, cross-continental coffin of calm. No sooner have Parisian masons raised thicker walls than word arrives that Saracen corsairs have overrun Fraxinetum in Provence, turning forested valleys into slave-raiding corridors that reach as far north as the Swiss passes. You ride south and smell orange blossom mingled with smoke. Minarets built from stolen cloister stones rise on hilltops now patrolled by swift Moorish cavalry. Merchants cluster behind you on the Alpine mule tracks, trading silk for security. In exchange, they carry stories of Sicilian towns paying jizya to emirs by day and tithes to Rome by night, of monasteries in the Camargue burying relics beneath salt pans while negotiators haggle with captains who quote the Quran as deftly as the Psalms. As spring thaws the Danube floodplain, fresh thunder echoes in the east. Magyar horse archers swarm through Moravian ruins, their arrows singing like summer locusts. They ride so fast the earth seems to roll backward under their hooves. You join a Bavarian Margrave at the Lech River, where bearded veterans debate whether to dig palisades or build hilltop keeps. One old captain spits and says neither will matter unless someone invents chains that can shackle wind. Still, peasants fell entire forests to raise motte and bailey forts, while barons promise protection in exchange for fixed labor on the very fields that famine and fear have already thinned. You watch free smallholders sign charters that bind them as hominies to local lords, pledging harvest shares for refuge behind earthen ramparts. A new social alloy, equal parts desperation and fealty, begins to harden in the Danube mud. With each raid, fortifications sprout like mushrooms after rain. Along Loire riverbanks, counts grant knights parcels of land beneficia on the condition that they stand ready with armored destriers whenever beacons flare. In the marshes of Flanders, you help a blacksmith rivet iron bands onto a nasal helm for a vassal who has surrendered his independence for a tower room and grazing rights. Monastic scribes adapt the language of oaths. What was once a handshake in God's sight becomes a ceremony performed at sword point over relics, sealed by the kiss of peace. Bishops add the rite of homagium to penitential manuals, warning of hellfire for lords who abandon sworn men or vassals who break their day of service. The Church, having crowned emperors, now sanctifies contracts hammered out in blood and barley. You return to Aachen, or what remains of its grandeur, finding the palace workshop shuttered, its craftsmen drafted to reinforce local walls. Louis's imperial successors occupy scattered courts where currency bears half-erased effigies and royal writs travel slower than rumors. Yet even in architectural decay, you notice patterns of resilience. The school founded by Alcuin survives as a cathedral chapter, its canons training scribes to copy charters that map vassalage like a lattice across patchwork realms. Carolingian minuscule mutates into tighter, taller Gothic hands, better suited to cramped margins in which jurists annotate who owes which service to whom and what portion of a knight's equipage counts and toward the servitium debitum. One autumn you sit in a smoky hall in Anjou, while Lord Fulk Nera, known behind his back as the Black Falcon, swears to guard the relics of St. Martin if the local abbey funds a new stone keep on the hillside. The abbot agrees. Labor tithes are levied. Soon dozens of calloused hands quarry honey-colored limestone, singing hymns whose Latin syllables drift over scaffolding like prayer flags. Watching the walls rise, you recall the emperor's dictum that memory is fortified by architecture. This keep is not a school, yet its very stones record a lesson where central power falters. Security becomes a localized craft, and land itself transforms into currency minted in castles instead of mints. Across Europe, the pattern repeats until a rough equilibrium takes shape. Vikings settle in the Seine Delta, baptize their chieftains in Rouen, and call their new duchy Normandy. Saracen strongholds in the Alps decay under Frankish countermarches, though their traders linger in market stalls from Arles to Turin, selling pepper that seasons both lentils and legend. The Magyars push as far as Bavaria before a coalition of East Frankish dukes, hurls them back at the Lechfeld. Years later, their princes convert to Latin Christianity. Clad in mail coats traded for quiet borders, each invader becomes, in time, a neighbor. Each fortification becomes the nucleus of a tone. Each oath, once provisional, ossifies into the custom we'll one day call feudal law. You ride between these embryonic baronies, carrying saddlebags of updated capitularies, clauses on bridge maintenance, on the peace of God, on shelter for traveling clerics. At every manor gate, a steward requires you to repeat the passwords of allegiance. Whose vassal are you? Whose boon companion? Whose man? Your answer, "I serve," the written word, earns nervous laughter, but passage all the same. For even the roughest knight knows a missile lost to fire is harder to replace than a suit of chainmail. Over hearth dinners, you exchange news a stone tower just finished in Blois, a Viking by-name translated clumsily into Latin deeds, a Magyar chief's son studying psalms at Regensburg. Threads of connection flash like sparks in dry straw, refusing to die. As winter settles, you pause atop a hill near the Rhine and watch torches wink across dark fields, tracing the lines of new estates. You think of the unified empire that once stretched across these lands, then of the parchment that split it, and finally of the fortresses now stitching together a different kind of map, one built less on imperial decree than on reciprocal need. Here, in the glow of watchfires and the crunch of frost under hooves, you recognize a paradox invasion shattered the old order, yet the very pressure of those marauders forged bonds of loyalty, chartered rights, and stone-ribbed refuges that will, in time, birth cities and parliaments. You spur your horse along a ridge path loud with winter leaves and feel the wind scrape your cheeks raw. Somewhere ahead, scribes in torch-lit towers draft law codes in half-Gothic script. Vikings teach their sons to read Latin charters, and Magyar nobles haggle dowries denominated in hides and horses instead of plunder. The world is no safer than before, but it is thicker woven with castles, contracts, and shared prayers. And you, still the courier of ink and witness of change, ride on beneath a sky where every star could be either beacon or burning village, determined once more to keep copying the light. A pale dawn finds you crossing the Thuringian plain, hoarfrost silvering the stubble where last summer's wheat once stood. The watchfires that ring each village no longer burn against Vikings or Saracens. Those threats have ebbed, but against something subtler. Rival dukes, shifting alliances, the uncertainty that lingers whenever power diffuses faster than trust. Yet while lesser lords fence one another with parchment and lance, rumors swirl of a new center of gravity rising beyond the heart's peaks. A prince who forges consensus the way his forebears swung swords. You reach Magdeburg just in time to see that rumor given flesh. Otto tall, broad, the iron-jawed son of the late Henry the Fowler, rides through the gate beneath banners stitched with a black eagle grasping thunderbolts. Citizens line crooked lanes, offering rye bread and salt on elmwood platters. Monks swing censers thick with frankincense. Merchants elbow for a glimpse of the man who, at Riad and Merseburg, drove back Slavs that once threatened to unpick this eastern fringe of Christendom. You fall in with the procession and notice something striking. Otto moves not with the swagger of a petty warlord, but with the deliberate calm of someone already measuring his shadow against history. Inside a half-built cathedral, he kneels before a sarcophagus Henry commissioned, but never saw finished. Otto's lips barely move, yet the silence in the nave vibrates prayer doubling as promise. When he rises, He does so with a clarity of purpose that crackles in the air like frost beneath dawn sunlight, the patchwork of East Francia, Bavaria, Swabia, and Saxony will fuse or fracture here and now. The next months blur into a waltz of diplomacy. You copy charters that bind rebellious dukes through marriage pacts and judicious grants of royal domain. You witness Otto shepherd his infant son to the throne of Aachen as co-king, broadcasting continuity through the realm's capillary of oaths. But unification by pen alone will not hold. News arrives that Magyar riders, emboldened by piecemeal tribute from lesser counts, have crossed the Lethe River again. Arrowheads glinting like hornets in the sun. In July 955, you join the imperial host on the grim, flat expanse of the Lechfeld near Augsburg. The heat bakes the sod until it cracks, releasing a stench of trampled grass and anxious horses. Otto rides the line, visor open, quoting the Psalms in a voice loud enough to be carried by the wind. Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord. His captains answer with mailed fists thumping shields, their infantry, a patchwork of Swabian spearmen and Saxon axemen, kneel for a blessing that mingles sweat with holy oil. When the Magyars' first arrow storm whistles overhead, it is as if time snaps taut. Otto holds his knights in reserve until the nomads overcommit, then unleashes a wedge-shaped charge that cleaves their flank like an axe through oak. You ride with the baggage column, quills and ink strapped next to spare bowstrings, witnessing lightning flashes of steel and sudden calms where corpses already stiffen under flies. By dusk, the Magyar formation dissolves, survivors flee east, harried by cavalry pounding drums carved from captured shields. In the smoky twilight, Otto gives thanks beside a makeshift altar, the Lech's muddy water turning crimson beneath the chalice. Word of victory radiates across the realm, solidifying his legitimacy faster than any treaty parchment ever could. Triumph breeds possibility. At Quedlinburg's Easter Court, Otto convenes bishops and abbots alongside dukes scolded for tardy levies. You note how smoothly he toggles between martial ferocity and fatherly chastisement one moment recalling the slaughter at Lechfeld, the next praising scholars who copy Augustine in newly standardized book hands. Over supper, he speaks quietly of a larger vision, an empire reborn, not through mere bloodlines, but through synergy with the Church. For decades, popes have looked north whenever Roman streets boil with factional violence. Now, with Magdeburg's spires reaching skyward, and Lechfeld's victory fresh in song, that northern savior seems close enough to summon. The summons comes sooner than expected. Late in 961, Pope John XII dispatches envoys whose scarlet tabards bear scratches from Lombard brigands. They beg Otto to protect St. Peter's patrimony from King Berengar of Italy, who has encroached on papal lands and confiscated monastery tithes. You accompany the imperial train south through Brenner Pass, wind slicing between limestone ramparts, each switchback echoing the earlier march of another would-be Augustus 2 centuries before. Yet unlike Charlemagne, Otto travels with a cadre of canon lawyers fluent in both scripture and Roman jurisprudence. Conquest is merely stage one in a drama whose climax will be legal as much as military. In northern Italy, Berengar's levies crumble. Otto imposes order swiftly, reaffirming Lombard bishops in exchange for oaths that bypass local princes and flow directly to the crown. Then comes Rome. You enter the city at dawn on February 2, 962. Frescoed palaces lean like weary veterans, and the Tiber smells of silt and centuries. Yet as Otto dismounts before St. Peter's, The populace erupts into cheers, choreographed by papal agents. Inside the basilica, candlelight catches motes of dust swirling like tiny souls. Pope John, barely 21, places a gold crown reportedly recast from a diadem of Constantine upon Otto's head and proclaims him Imperator Augustus. The moment feels simultaneously scripted and seismic. Choirs thunder the Laudes Regii. Incense stings your eyes. Jesus. And in that blur of sound and scent, you perceive the ancient pact reborn sword. Secures mitre. Mitre legitimizes sword. Yet Otto's eyes, half hidden under the rim of the crown, reveal calculation the same day. He extracts two pivotal privileges. First, the Pope swears never to anoint a rival without imperial consent. Second, Roman nobility pledge allegiance directly to the emperor. The gesture is subtle, but it redirects the gravitational center of Latin Christendom's spiritual supremacy remains in Rome. But the pivot of practical power, military, diplomatic, dynastic, now tilts north toward the rivers and forests Otto rules. Your quill hardly rests over the following weeks. Imperial chancery clerks issue diplomas that grant German abbeys sweeping autonomy in exchange for supplying educated clergy to frontier bishoprics. Italian cities receive charters confirming ancient rights while binding them to imperial courts of appeal. Every scroll you blot carries Otto's newly minted seal, a crowned eagle, clutching both scepter and cross. Each document sketches a thread in the tapestry of what contemporaries begin calling the Sacrum Imperium Romanum Holy because God crowns it through the Pope, Roman because its mandate claims descent from Caesar, and German because its sinews are Saxon, Bavarian, and Swabian muscle. Of course, equilibrium proves fragile. Back north, dukes grumble that Italian campaigns siphon silver. In Rome, factions resent imperial oversight. You witness Otto depose John XII after rumors of treason, replacing him with Leo VIII amid charges traded like daggers. Some whisper blasphemy, others applaud purification, but most simply watch to see whether this new emperor can wield ecclesiastical discipline without severing the branch he sits on. His answer is plain. The Church, to flourish, must stand on two legs: spiritual guidance from Peter's heir, temporal guardianship from the imperial sword. Remove either, and wolves will circle. As you ride back toward the Alps that summer, parchment packets rustling in your saddlebags, you glance often at the imperial eagle stamped upon their wax. It represents more than authority. It is an experiment in partnership, a living hinge between altar and throne. Behind you, Rome's bells fade into cicada buzz. Ahead, German valleys wait with harvests that will finance new cathedrals and frontier missions. The empire you now serve is both older than memory and startlingly new, grafted together from crises that once seemed terminal. Whether this graft will hold, no one can say. But you tighten your cloak, feeling the late spring wind lash past, and ride on with cautious optimism for the first time since Charlemagne's heirs split the world at Verdun. A single mantle stretches from Baltic marshes to the Apennine spine, and beneath its folds, scribes, soldiers, and saints labor however fitfully toward a common horizon. You leave the Alpine passes behind and ride into Swabia at harvest time, the fields glowing amber under a sky washed clean by early autumn rain. Everywhere you look, banners flap from timber keep's blue wyverns, red griffins, black hunting horns, each standard announcing the reach of a different lord who owes faith and service to Otto's new throne. Yet the power you feel pressing on the countryside isn't imperial. It's local, granular, rooted in hedgerows and hearths. You sense it in the way peasants glance at the manor palisade before bargaining over barley, in the hush that falls when a mounted knight clatters down the muddy lane. The empire is vast, but daily life now hinges on thousands of smaller bargains, sealed far from Aachen's marble throne. You spend a gray dusk in the hall of Count Conrad, a Saxon veteran whose knuckles still bear scars from the Lechfeld charge. The hall reeks of oak smoke and wet wool. Rushes on the floor muffle bootsteps and catch spilled grease. Conrad's vassals crowd the benches, landless younger sons in quilted gambesons, freemen who surrendered ancestral plots for a gift of chainmail and a chance to ride in the count's retinue. The steward calls you forward because your satchel holds parchment, a fresh copy of Otto's diploma confirming Conrad's fief in the Hohenlohe forest. The count presses a ring the size of a small walnut into your palm as courier's fee. But it's the scene that follows that pins your attention. One by one, the knights step before Conrad, kneel on the sheepskin that serves as ceremonial cushion, and place clasped hands between their lords. Each vows to appear at the muster with helmet, spear, and 3 mounts when the red banner is raised. In return, Conrad grants each a strip of forest or a hamlet of 6 hovels and 2 oxen teams. The steward notes everything on wax tablets. In a month, the transaction will migrate into ink in the monastery scriptorium. But tonight, it's the silent exchange, the gaze, the ring touch, the kiss of peace that makes the pact real. You realize you're watching the empire's true engine turn not imperial decrees, not even papal blessings, but the braid of land and loyalty, welded by custom and sanctified by mutual necessity. With dawn comes the annual court, the placitum, held in an open field so that even the humblest tenant can press grievances. A miller complains that wolves took his donkey. The count remits 2 silver pennies from next season's tithe. A reeve accuses a serf of missing boon work. The man swears he was sick, and 3 neighbors testify to his fever. Justice is rough, but it's local and immediate, dispensed beneath the same oak whose acorns feed the swine mentioned in the dispute. As you jot notes, you sense how the web of protection and obligation stretches beyond mounted men to the thatchers, plowmen, and swineherds who grease the gears of noble ambition. Weeks later, you cross into Burgundy, where Duke Hugh holds court on the timber balcony of his new stone donjon. His bannermen arrive beneath gonfalons stitched by wives and daughters. Each banner's fringe marks the number of lances owed. When Hugh announces a campaign against a rival's encroaching fortress, you watch him parcel out duties. Some knights will ride in person. Others will pay scutage coin in lieu of blood, so Hugh can hire crossbowmen from Lombardy. Even absence can be monetized now. Fealty has learned arithmetic. Afterward, clerks enumerate obligations in triplicate, and you see Otto's minuscule tucked neatly beside scribbles in Old French. Proof that languages may diverge, but the ledger reconciles them all under the arithmetic of loyalty. On the road to Aquitaine, you shelter in a manor where Lady Ermengarde manages 3 villages, while her husband serves in the Emperor's Italian Guard. She moves through her great hall like sunlight through stained glass, dispensing seed grain, judging wool weights, collecting the priest's Easter dues. Her reeve tells you the people call her Domina, with the same mix of reverence and wariness they once reserved for abbots. You realize feudalism is elastic enough to fit a widow's authority, provided she guards the ledger and the granary keys with equal fervor. At night, as storms batter the shutters, she asks you to read aloud from the Gospel of Luke. Afterward, she seals a letter to her husband reporting the manor's yield. Faith, literacy, and oat harvests braid together. indisputable as the iron hinges on her chest of account rolls. From Aquitaine, you ride north by the coastal road and see another transformation castles multiplying like mushrooms after rainfall. Where Charlemagne's Missy once lodged in royal villas, squat keeps now rise wood at first, then stone each a pivot for the turning gears of obligation. The masons carve arrow slits that double as status symbols, and the very silhouette of a crenellated tower on a distant ridge sparks haggling over market tolls. Inside these walls, artisans hammer iron spurs and tailor quilted surcoats, birthing a new social type, the knight, distinct from both foot soldier and high-born aristocrat, a middle stratum with allegiance purchased by land but validated by martial display. Yet not all contracts ride on horseback. You winter in Champagne, where towns are budding like frost-resistant flowers around monastic cellars and castle gates. Merchants barter wool for Flemish cloth and Venetian salt. They pay passage tolls to the count, who in turn guarantees safe conduct. The pact is feudal in essence, protection against profit, but it fertilizes something novel: urban self-confidence. You record a charter granting the burghers of Provins the right to elect their own watch captains and set fines for brawling, so long as they render an annual cartload of candles to the count's chapel. It's a small liberty, but it sparks debates in taverns thick with wood smoke about communes, collective oaths that echo knightly homage, only horizontal instead of vertical. Spring draws you east where the Rhine broadens like a braided sash. Here bishops double as territorial princes, balancing croziers with sword belts. You attend a synod in Mainz where Archbishop William confirms that serfs who flee to a chartered city and remain a year and a day gain freedom, provided they pay a departure fee to their former lord. Even emancipation has learned the language of quid pro quo. Outside the cathedral, apprentices celebrate by hoisting their guild banners loom. Anvil. Brewers mash fork each an emblem of new identities sliding between the rungs of the traditional ladder. You sense the feudal web stretching, thinning in places, yet holding, precisely because it can flex. Still, the web's strength rests on ritual. Late that summer, you ride with Duke Burchard to renew his oath at Otto's imperial court in Magdeburg. The ceremony is spare but potent. Burchard, unhelmeted, kneels, places his folded hands in the emperor's, and speaks a formula older than memory. I become your man from this day forward. Otto lifts him, kisses his cheek, then hands over a staff symbolizing the Duke's regnum. You realize that despite charters, marriages, and coin, the heart of feudalism is performative. Its magic summoned whenever two people risk binding their honor in public. The audience counts. Abbots, minor vassals cheers, because each renewed bond re-knits the tapestry that shelters them all. Yet fractures loom. As the decade wanes, you hear whispers of reformers who claim too many bishops fight and too many knights pray only for plunder. In Cluny, monks chant psalms for secular lords to relinquish church control. At court, younger nobles grumble that great fiefs calcify into dynastic monopolies. Even peasants push back, forming sworn associations, little leagues of plowmen refusing extra labor days. You suspect the system's success carries seeds of revolt. Land is finite, but ambition is perennial. On the last evening of the year, you stand atop a half-finished tower overlooking the Elbe frontier. Snowflakes swirl like ash, settling on parchment where you've drafted a fresh oath for a newly knighted youth. As he reads the words by torchlight, his breath turns to clouds. In his eyes, you see hunger for land, for honor, for stories that place his name alongside Charlemagne's paladins. You hand him the quill. He signs, and the ink freezes before it dries. The moment feels fragile, yet you know it will endure. Copied a dozen times into cartularies and lawsuit records. Invoked long after both of you lie beneath moss-covered stones. You tuck the contract into your satchel and descend the winding stair, boots ringing on frozen steps. Outside, the manor bells toll prime even though dawn is hours away, a precaution against raiders. Yes, but also a pulse in the body politic. Each peal reminds lord, knight, monk, and serf of their places in a hierarchy built from overlapping promises, grain for shelter, steel for pasture, prayers for peace. You pull your cloak tight and mount up, riding into a wind that smells of pine and distant hearth smoke, certain that the road ahead will reveal new cracks in the structure, yet equally certain the chorus of oaths behind you will keep patching them word by sworn word, deed by notarized deed, until the next upheaval redraws the ledger once more. You journey south in early spring, hoofbeats thudding across thaw-softened roads. As murmurs of reform travel faster than any courier, they gather force in taverns, pulpits, cloisters everywhere. Folk whisper that the very prayers stitched into the empire's fabric have begun to fray. By the time you crest the wooded ridge above the Saône, banners embroidered with scallop shells flap from pilgrim staffs, and the name on every tongue is Cluny. You steer toward the abbey just as dawn pours honey gold over its 3 ascending spires. Inside the gate, silence roars louder than any forge. Monks glide through cloisters in orderly processions, their black habits brushing sandstone worn smooth by midnight vigils. They chant the entire Psalter each week, unbroken by feudal obligations, no plowing, no garrison duty, no lord's hunting party to entertain. Here, the rule of Saint Benedict has been reforged into something incandescent: prayer as labor, labor as prayer, all under direct papal protection. You speak with Abbot Odilo, a gaunt man whose eyes blaze brighter than the votive candles flanking the altar. He tells you that sin clings to Europe's nobility like rust to iron, and only a furnace of continual worship can burn it clean. You feel the heat of that conviction in your marrow. When you depart, your saddlebags brim with parchment bulls demanding that bishops disentangle themselves from worldly lordship. Crossing Burgundy's rolling vineyards, you find tension vibrating like a plucked lute string. Lords who once dangled chaplainries as favors now face the prospect of losing golden sheaves of tithe. Bishops who command fortresses weigh salvation against stone walls. In castle halls, armored men roll their eyes at talk of celibate clergy and simony bands, yet they listen, for the Pope in Rome has begun to echo Cluny's fire. His legates stride into synods brandishing decrees that sound more like ultimatums: priests must not marry. Church offices are not for sale. Kings must quit investing bishops with ring and staff. You witness the first sparks in Milan. There, the Pataria, a movement of butchers, weavers, and candle carvers, inflamed by reformist preaching storms the episcopal palace, chanting that the shepherd must be pure or perish. Their zeal curdles into violence. Silver candelabra smash against cobbles, slicked with spilled wine and blood. City guards hesitate, unsure whether to defend their bishop or join the righteous mob. You slip down an alley thick with incense and indignation, understanding that holiness, once a private pursuit, has become a public weapon. News of the turmoil reaches the imperial court at Goslar, where Henry, Otto's grandson, holds Christmas court beneath draperies stitched with scarlet eagles. You present him with papal letters charging him to support reform or stand aside. His jaw tightens. The empire, he says, was built on the twin pillars of throne and altar. If Rome saws through one, the other will topple. Yet he also fears appearing godless before subjects newly awakened to moral thunder. His solution is delicate as eggshell convene assemblies. Affirm devotion, delay decisive action. But delay is a luxury reformers refuse. A winter later, a new Pope Gregory, stern as granite, sends a summons that is not invitation, but summons the emperor must cease investing bishops. You stand in the cathedral at Worms when Henry fires back, marshalling bishops to denounce Gregory as a false shepherd. The acoustics turn every echo into an accusation. Parchment crackles like tinder as signatures accumulate. By dusk, the emperor has declared the pope deposed, unaware that even imperial seals can't nullify spiritual anathema. Within weeks, a papal bull arrives declaring Henry excommunicated, his oaths dissolved. You watch courtiers blanch. A king who cannot take the Eucharist cannot command hearts or soon words. Rebellion erupts among German dukes faster than spring floods. They gather at Triber, demanding Henry reconcile or relinquish his crown. Desperation drives him across the Alps in midwinter. You trudge behind his sparse retinue up switchbacks swallowed by drifts taller than horse and rider. Frost crystals rim Henry's beard. Yet he presses on toward Canossa, a hilltop stronghold where Gregory has taken refuge behind Matilda of Tuscany's loyal spears. The scene you behold on the castle's outer bailey burns itself into memory. Barefoot in falling snow, Henry stands 3 days wrapped in a wool shirt, pleading for absolution. You feel the high winds sough through his penitent posture, and you grasp that power itself is shifting from mailed fist to moral spectacle. When Gregory finally lifts the ban, the empire sighs, but the contest is merely paused, not solved. Papal supremacy has found theater, imperial dignity, a fissure. You return north to find Germany split by civil war banners of Rudolph of Swabia clash against Henry's loyalists. Bishops choose sides according to conscience, ambition, or survival instinct. Castles you once visited as peaceful guest houses now smolder on distant ridgelines. Relics ride in ox-drawn carts to safer shrines. Yet even amid chaos, the machinery of feudal obligation keeps clanking. Harvests are sown, rents collected, oaths renewed beneath charred roof beams. The system endures because everyone, from plowman to paladin, still needs someone higher up to swear upon. Meanwhile, a different flame jumps the Mediterranean. In southern France, you attend a council where papal emissaries read letters from Byzantine Emperor Alexios, pleading for Western aid against the Turkic forces encroaching on Anatolia. The reforming pope now sees a grand convergence channel Europe's restless nights away from fratricide toward holy war abroad, unite Christendom under Rome, and perhaps reconcile emperor and pontiff before Muslim walls. You watch as clerics float the idea of pilgrimage with weapons, a journey of penance rewarded not by coin or land, but by eternal absolution. In November, you stand beneath vaulted arcs of Clermont's cathedral porch, while Pope Urban, successor to Gregory, mounts a wooden platform. His voice, honed by years of courtroom rhetoric, booms across the throng. Jerusalem groans beneath an alien yoke. Christ's empty tomb awaits liberation. Who will trade temporal toil for imperishable glory? A roar answers him, the first syllables of a chant that will soon echo from Pyrenees to Rhine. Deus vult, God wills it. You scan the faces young lords hungry for estates they can't inherit. Burghers seeking to erase sins the confessional won't fully absolve. Rough peasants who imagine the holy city as the new Jerusalem promised by itinerant preachers. All swear themselves to a cross sewn in scarlet cloth. You ride alongside the trickle that becomes a river. Barons pawning keeps to finance ships at Bari. Masons carving scallop shells onto shield bosses. Parchment dealers swamped with orders for departure charters. Local feudal ties loosen. As supranational cause tightens a knight may forsake his count if Christ himself is the liege lord calling. Yet crusading vows still mimic the old formula hands clasped. Words spoken before relics proof that the feudal script can stretch to cosmic stagecraft. Back in Germany, Henry fights both rebels and reputational eclipse. To reclaim moral footing, he, too, vows a crusade, then delays under pretext of logistical prudence. You grasp the irony the very weapon meant to unify the faithful now serves as political currency. But momentum has passed to France's Duke Godfrey, Normandy's Bohemond, and Count Raymond of Toulouse men once entangled in local feuds who now style themselves armed pilgrims. As you cross the Rhine once more, sunset paints the water blood red, mirroring banners of the cross whipping west to east. The empire behind you quakes with unresolved struggle. The road ahead teems with hope and horror in equal measure. Yet one continuity persists every oath imperial, papal, or crusading still leans on the architecture of mutual obligation you witnessed in Conrad's smoky hall. Whether the pledge binds knight to count or sinner to celestial glory, its power lies in public declaration and shared memory. You breathe the cool evening air, ink-stained fingers curled around reins, and ride on, aware that your next parchments will bear names both old and startlingly new. They will record debts of armor and grain for campaigns that march far beyond Otto's eagle shadow, under a different emblem yet propelled by the same engine of promise and reward. And you suspect that long after these crusaders either triumph or perish, scribes like you will still be copying the light, trying to make sense of a world forever reforging its chains into crowns, its prayers into war cries, and its ledgers into legends. You sail from Bari into a dawn the color of molten copper, the Adriatic slapped into white ruffles by a nervous spring wind. Your galley's deck crouches under barrels of salted pork, strings of onion, and rolled vellum bearing crusader vows, each sealed with lumps of blood-red wax. Below, knights argue whether the city of Antioch is guarded by jinn or merely Saracen soldiery, while cooks mutter prayers that their bread survives the crossing. When the first gulls wheel above the rigging, you catch the briny tang of Levant markets already haunting the hold like a premonition of pepper and silk. The crusade proves everything the sermons promised pilgrimage, penance, spectacle, and nothing they warned of. Outside Nicaea, you copy a roll call of barons only to scratch half their names weeks later beside Dorylaeum, where heat and arrows stripped mail from flesh as cleanly as parchment from calfskin. In the hill passes of Cilicia, you watch peasants exchange goat milk for iron nails, evidence that holy war is also commerce in motion. When, months later, Jerusalem's walls fall beneath ladders and fury, the victors clasp hands in streets knee-deep with both blood and jubilant hymn. You record the city's rechristening, note the charter that invents the Kingdom of Jerusalem, and realize the Latin West has sprouted a colonial graft thousands of miles from the Loire. Yet conquest is only the voyage's first cargo. On the return leg, your holds brim with ideas astrolabes inscribed in Kufic script, jars of Damascus glass that bend light like captured rainbows, folded treatises on algebra wrapped in linen scented with myrrh. At Amalfi, dock workers unload more than spice. They unload curiosity. Monks hurry the manuscripts north, and scholastic embers catch in abbey libraries from Monte Cassino to Cluny. You escort one bundle to Bologna, where Irnerius lectures beneath porticos painted a red as deep as Tuscan wine. His students' clergy, notaries, ambitious burghers' sons chew through Justinian's digest as if it were fresh bread. You sense a new power loosening feudal knots written Roman law, resurrected, systematized, ready to challenge custom with clause and citation. The push and pull of old bonds and new freedoms intensify when you reach Paris. There, on the Ile de la Cité, cathedral canons wrangle with itinerant masters over lecture space. To settle the quarrel, they invent something unprecedented, a guild of knowledge. Universitas Magistrorum et Scholarium, sworn not to a lord, but to the life of the mind. You stand in a muddy courtyard while Peter Abelard debates whether faith seeks understanding or understanding births faith. Students cheer like tourney crowds. Dialectic has become blood sport. You jot glosses in the margin of Augustine, marveling at how easily syllogisms can topple once impervious dogma, and how quickly bishops move to corral such fire inside statutes that echo feudal oaths. Only now the fief is logic. Outside the lecture halls, new stone skeletons claw at the sky. At Chartres, you recline on grass wet with spring rain, craning your neck to watch masons hoist a ribbed vault that looks light enough to float away. The master builder explains in the same measured Latin a royal notary might use that pointed arches redistribute weight, allowing walls to dissolve into stained glass sermons. When sunlight pours through cobalt panes, you understand that theology has traded cloistered parchment for radiant geometry. Guild charters chiseled into the cathedral porch read like knightly contracts glassmakers owe panels, carpenters timbers, in exchange for burial within the shadow of their labor's glory. Even beauty has learned the language of mutual obligation. Commerce keeps pace with contemplation. On Flanders' damp plains, textile looms thunder louder than chapel bells. You cross Loden-scented workrooms in Ghent, where fullers stomp cloth to rhythms that drown out the reeve's tally. At champagne fairs, you help a Lombard merchant calculate letters of exchange inked promises that let silver shift from Rome to Bruges without rattling inside a saddlebag. Local counts patrol the fairgrounds in mail, enforcing what they market as the peace of God, but what you recognize as brand protection. Here, feudal muscle underwrites capitalist nerve, and both churn profits that finance more crusader fleets, more university bursaries, more rose windows. Not all growth glitters. In Languedoc, you copy papal bulls condemning heresy that germinates in the same intellectual soil as scholastic debate. Cathar Perfecti preached that the material world is a trap. Nobles torn between piety and profit shelter them, if only to needle northern kings. When the Pope calls for internal crusade, you march beside banners bearing the keys of Peter against villages that speak Occitan psalms. After Bézier's pyre-lit horror, you add another entry to Christendom's ledger of vows and violence. Wary that reform, once aimed at greed, now brands dissent itself as treason. Then, as if heaven tires of human conflict, clouds darken across Asia and cough death into Genoese harbors. The plague rides carrack and caravan, a silent crusader armed with breath. You pen mortality lists until ink runs like tears. Manors lose reeves. Guilds lose masters. Obligations unravel because corpses honor no contracts. Yet in plague's void rise wages for survivors, bargaining power for serfs, experimental cures from university physicists who dissect Arabic medical texts alongside Galen. Cathedrals pause, fields lie fallow, but presses of innovation grind on. fueled by necessity's harsh whip. When the worst passes, you find yourself in Florence, a republic where bankers, not barons, dictate policy beneath frescoes of crowned merchants parading into paradise. Their double-entry ledgers look eerily like your own crusade roster's columns of credit and debit, sin and absolution translated into florins. You dine with Dante's younger disciples, poets who vernacularize heaven and hell so smiths and laundresses can audit salvation without Latin tutors. Literacy seeps outward like dye, tinting even tavern chatter with fragments of scripture and statute. Your final journey carries you to Oxford, where morning mist curls around half-timbered halls. There, students parse Aristotle freshly minted from Arabic commentaries, arguing that form inheres in matters the way a lord's will inheres in his domain. Some rumble that if reason can tread this far, it may yet stride beyond Rome's doctrinal hedges. Yet even the boldest skeptic still kneels at Compline, for habit outlives upheaval. Standing on Magdalen Bridge at dusk, you gaze westward. Behind you lie centuries of vows feudal, monastic, imperial, crusading each forged to answer a crisis, each spawning new questions. Ahead, you sense other forges heating printing presses, gunpowder armies, fiscal states. But the river below keeps the same patient course it carved when Roman legions first mapped Britannia. And in its reflection, you see continuity towers, spires, and ships' masts all pointing skyward, testament to an age that learned to lace faith, forever just beyond reach, into the very mortar of its worldly ambitions. You unroll your last blank parchment, dip quill into ink, and begin to write the story of what you've seen, an arc that bends from collapsed empire to cathedrals of light, from oaths sworn over swords to contracts sealed with wax, from pilgrimage in mail to inquiry in lecture hall. You know the scribe's task never ends. Someone must keep copying the light, even when plagues dim it, even when wars shatter the windows designed to catch it. So you start a fresh line, confident another hand will finish the sentence when yours falters, as countless hands finished those of the masters before you. And that, Princeton, brings our long moonlit journey from collapsing empires to soaring cathedrals softly to a close. If you're still awake, let your screen glow one last time and drop a note in the comments telling us what time it is where you are right now. Are you listening at 10 p.m., 1 a.m., or well past dawn? I'd love to see the constellation of hours shining back from every corner of the world. For now, take a deep breath. Let the stories settle like dust in an ancient archive and drift into the quiet peace of sleep. Good night, and may your dreams keep copying the light.